Okay, good morning, everyone. My name is Joaquin Esquivel. I'm chair of the State Water Resources Control Board. Today is Tuesday, May 2nd. It is 9:32 a.m., and I would like to call this meeting to order. I'll start by introducing my fellow colleagues. With me here today is Vice Chair Doreen Diadamo, Board Member Sean McGuire, and Board Member Laurel Firestone. Joining us as well is our Chief Deputy, Jonathan Bishop, our Chief Counsel, Michael Loffer. Our Clerk of the Board is Courtney Tyler, and assisting her today is Margie Argel and Michael Reading. As you can see, this is a hybrid meeting, so we have both in-person and webcast component. If you're joining us virtually, you're either tuning in through our customary Cal EPA webcast and or YouTube Live. But if you intend on commenting on any of today's items, you need to be on the Zoom platform with us. There are instructions on how to get onto the platform at the top of the agenda today. But if you're having any challenges doing so, please do just email the clerk of the board at board.clerk@waterboards.ca.gov, and she can help you get onto the platform. Once you are on the platform, your camera will be off, your microphone will be on mute until it is your turn to speak on the item that you've indicated you wish to speak on. For those of you in the room, good morning. We're here in Sacramento in the Cal EPA building. Just a few announcements for all of us here as well. Please do observe the two exits that are here. In case of an emergency, we will, or three, we will exit calmly over to Cesar Chavez Plaza and await further instruction. Also, if you intend on commenting on any item today, there should be a QR code there in the back of the room where you can fill out a speaker card. Please do introduce yourself if you're affiliated with any organization. And also, lastly, please do turn off any noise-making devices. We are in a smaller room, so everything will sound all the more louder. So thank you, and we can move on to our agenda, which always customarily starts off with public forum, and looking to the clerk of the board to see who we might have coming up as I pull up my documents. Okay. And Ms. Wendell, in person. I don't believe she's here in the room with us, and she may have marked the form wrong. And then otherwise, we can move on. And Ms. Wendell, if you're viewing us remotely, you should be on the Zoom platform. And or if you're tuning in and you're outside of the room, please do come in and join. I think next we would have Ben King. Good morning.
Edit that.
No, you're good.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr.
I'm a member of the Joint Technical Advisory Committee for the Colusa Subbasin and director of the Colusa County Resource Conservation District. But my comments are my own. I don't represent those organizations, but they're informed by my activity as a stakeholder. And I've been focusing primarily on water quality issues in the Colusa Subbasin. So in that light, I recently reviewed some of the water management plans. Some local entities have been doing submissions to the Bureau of Reclamation, and that led me to review the water management plan for the Colusa National Refuge. And I reviewed it. The document I looked at was written in 2011. I sent it to you, but I missed the deadline. I apologize for that. So I can follow up with that. But in that document, I was surprised to find out that there's a mercury contamination at the Colusa National Refuge and mercury and chromium contamination at the Sacramento National Refuge. So I wasn't aware of that fact. And what's concerning is that the text of the document says that the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation drilled 4 test wells in the early 1990s. Chemical analysis of this groundwater wells at the Sacramento and Colusa Natural Refuge detected mercury levels above the EPA chronic criteria of both Sacramento and Colusa refuges, and levels of a hexavalent form of chromium above the EPA chronic and acute levels at the Sacramento. Due to these test results, it is believed that the use of this water could have detrimental effect on aquatic and wildlife resources that utilize this area. In addition, limited quantity was found at test wells of the Sacramento National Wildlife Refuge. So there obviously is a issue of contamination. And, in the past, I've mentioned about the natural state when the land was just tribal lands of the native Winton people before settlement. And my family does go back to the 1860s and were early settlers in the area. And I'm in the process of converting 250 of those acres to permanent wetlands on the Colusa Basin in the Colusa Trough. But so it does seem like there's some issue, whether or not it's subterranean or an issue of drainage. I know the public trust document is built on the laws of Justinian, but I think the Romans learned from the Mesopotamians and they had a drainage issue, maybe not like the Sacramento Valley, but that was the end of their productivity of their lands. So I know that you're focused in CV salts, focused on nitrates and salts, but I keep on coming back to issues of TDS. Generically, it was documented by Willis Green that we had salt water that existed down to 100 feet or so in the Colusa Trough back to prior to settlement. Then in Colusa, we're exhibiting potential redox conditions of manganese, iron, and arsenic. There's been banded well in Colusa, actually arsenic, and now we have chromium and mercury that probably is a function of residency in these areas. The early in the 1860s, there was a such thing as a Colusa Petroleum Company, which was up in the hills from Williams. We had coal. There was obviously abandoned mercury mine above Wilbur Springs. As a kid, I knew of. There's a city called Chrome north of Elk Creek. And so that would potentially explain the chrome contamination in the Sacramento since coming down Willow Creek. And then the mercury is present on the whole west side. So, all these issues tie together. It's interesting. I'll finish up here, but my great grandparents came out in 1857. My grandfather grew up in the college town of College City when it was a college. And he moved from College City, Colusa in the early 1900s. He was district attorney, and his next door neighbor was Charles St. Maurice, who actually established RD 2047. And then the Depression happened, and then in the 40s and 50s, they kind of chopped up the plans. And I really think that we need to look at what the RD 2047 plans were, how they're carried out. And then even with sites, there was a Delavan interconnect, which has been abandoned, which seems to tie in to what RD 2047 tried to do, but was actually modified in what's called the 5 or 7 party agreement in the 1950s. So I'm involved in this. I'm kind of also living my grandfather's life, but also, we are on the Colusa Basin Drain, and then we also are small settlement contractors because my grandfather was one of the incorporators of Colusa Irrigation Company, and we actually hold a small part of that, right? So thank you for your time, and I want to bring this attention. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you for yours, Mr. King, and I appreciate you bringing attention to. I know, similarly throughout the state, we have these legacy issues, especially around water quality. And to your point, we absolutely have to think about quality as we think about the quantity decisions that we're having as well. I encourage you to work with the Regional Water Quality Control Board, particularly on better unpacking, what these challenges are around, and to your point, mercury, both because wetlands often produce methyl mercury. There's processes that go on that actually contribute to it, and then just the legacy of mining that's gone on. That we have mercury contamination up and down the Central Valley because of, and how we deal with those is going to be really important. So I really appreciate you just elevating that and taking the time here this morning to be with the board. So thank you. I believe unless Ms. Windle has made, I believe that wraps up public forum, and appreciate everyone coming here to address the board. Now we can move on to board business, and the first item is adoption of the board meeting minutes from the last board meeting. Do I have adjustments or a motion?
I'll move to adopt the minutes.
Second.
Thank you. Ms. Tyler, can you please call the roll call vote?
Board Member McGuire,
Aye.
Vice Chair Diadamo,
Aye.
Board Member Firestone,
Abstain.
Chair Esquivel.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you as well. That brings us to item number 2, which is our uncontested item and consideration of a proposed resolution amending the Proposition 1 Groundwater Grant Program Guidelines. Appreciate all the good work that's gone on to continue to adjust those so we can get dollars out and get projects here approved for those dollars. It's still uncontested, unless a board member or anyone would like to have further discussion on it. Entertain a motion.
I'll move to adopt. Second.
Thank you. Ms. Tyler, can you please call the roll call vote?
Board Member Firestone,
Aye.
Vice Chair Diadamo,
Aye.
Board Member McGuire,
Aye.
Chair Escabel.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you as well. That now brings us to item number 3, coasting along, which is our first informational item. And at this point, I know that Carla Namath from the Department of Water Resources is looking to be joining us. They won't be joining until after here 11 o'clock. So instead of maybe having half of it and holding it open, I say we just hold for now on item number 3. We'll come back to it after 11 o'clock. And instead, we'll bring us to item number 5 because we moved item number 4 now into our more general updates, and folks weren't ready on the data side for a monthly production update for item number 4. So we'll hold item number 3 till after 11, and that brings us to item number 5, which is an update on the status of the underground storage tank cleanup fund, an opportunity for public comment and allocation of certain funds generated from the petroleum storage fee.
Well, good morning,
Good morning.
Chair Esquivel, Vice Chair Diadamo, and board members. I'm always happy to give you our annual update, but I'm especially happy today because I have some pretty great accomplishments to tell you about. And with me here is Julie Osborne, our attorney from the Office of Chief Counsel, in case you have any questions on legal issues. I don't have a clicker, so next slide, please. So for those unaware, the UST, or Underground Storage Tank Cleanup Fund, provides a lot of services to Californians. We allow tank owners and operators to meet their federal financial responsibility requirement. We do that by reimbursing eligible costs for the cleanup of contaminants that come from these tanks. We're funded by a 2-cent per gallon petroleum storage fee, which is not in the gasoline tax. It's a storage fee that is paid by the owners and operators. And because we're such a big fund, we have a lot of help from the Office of Enforcement because there is such a potential for fraud. So they do help us get a handle on that. Next slide, please. So some cumulative claim statistics. We have 21,000 almost claims that we've received. We've closed more than half of those. We still have over 4,000 active claims, of which 17% are still open cases. And we always have a small amount of claims that are suspended for reasons such as figuring out who the responsible party is or who we should pay and other legal issues. Next slide, please. So reimbursements, big part of what we do. And I think a lot of people don't really understand the volume that we do at the fund. And this is a fine example because when this presentation was due, as of April 26th, we had received about 1,500 reimbursement requests, or RRs, paid 208 million of those, and we had released 2,214 of those to accounting, but that was for 390 million of our claims authority. In the last week, we've released another 7 million. So now we're about to hit 400, which is a great accomplishment by our staff. And we're probably going to hit our full authority. And one of the reasons we were able to do that is we've had a release of some pending payments due to settlement issues. 900 of those we were able to clear out. Next slide. So as you're probably aware, we have a priority class system. A's are the residentials, which is mainly heating oil tanks, home heating oil tanks. So those are smaller claims usually. B and C are small businesses and medium-sized government agencies and nonprofits. And D is everybody else, the bigger businesses. So looking at cost, this is one of the ways we were able to streamline our processes for reviewing reimbursements. The typical A claim is a little more than 100,000. B and C tend to be cost a little more, and the larger companies tend to have cost control mechanisms in place, so their claims usually don't cost as much. Next slide. And here is over the last 5 years, because we've recently activated so many of the lower priority claims on the priority list, 3,000 of them, we've paid these amounts to the priority classes, 2.6 million, 120, and about 900 million. Next slide, please. So we're not just a reimbursement machine. We have 7 companion programs that we also manage. We have our commingled plume account where we have 10 million to work on sites that are commingled, which means the contamination is mixed up, and those get a higher priority when they work on those together. Our ECAP, or Expedited Claims Account program, helps us to close sites more quickly and for less money. And we have an emergency abandoned recalcitrant account where we're able to, under contract, have regional boards refer us sites where folks have either abandoned the property or aren't able to do anything, and we do have a cost recovery lien mechanism on that account. Our orphan site cleanup fund has really, really blown up over the last several years, and I'll explain why in some later slides, but that allows us to clean up sites where the applicant or the grantee, we do grants for these, is not affiliated with the contamination. They inherited it, they discovered a tank, something like that. A lot of these are brownfield type sites. We have a school district account to help us pay school district claims. And we have our REST program, which is replacing, removing, or upgrading USTs. This is also growing because there's a deadline coming up at the end of 2025 for all the single wall tanks to be out of the ground. And then, as you all heard last month, we have our only account that allows us to pay for non-petroleum contamination. That is our SCAP, or site cleanup sub-account. And you just adopted a resolution for us last month where we have a new ranking methodology and a more of a focus on environmental justice communities. Next slide. So now the fun stuff. I'm able to tell you some good things that we have done. We recently transferred our fiscal management from the other side of DFA to our own financial unit. They are fabulous. They've lowered our error rate and expedited our funding. We've been doing a lot of outreach with US EPA and DWQ to help us because that single wall tank deadline is coming up. We'd like to be able to fund those folks, and we know there's going to be some releases that we discovered there. And we have a stalled case initiative that we're also running with US EPA and DWQ, where we're reaching out for those sites that are just stuck. There's nothing happening. A lot of times it's because of funding. A lot of times it's because there's no directive or the folks don't know what to do. So we are trying to help those sites move along. And Orphan, as I mentioned, has really grown. I think it's octupled for 2 million, and we just got another 30 million in the governor's budget for that program because we really need it. And we continue to review fund applications and issue letters of commitment in real time. Next slide. I like this guy. He's my little zero guy. He's got the spotlight on him because this is an unprecedented thing, and it's one of our biggest accomplishments. We have no appeals. We are now processing those in real time. We had a backlog as high as 240 5 years ago, got it down, and then 100. And we were able to do this by taking a look at our processes. Certainly, we're not shortcutting anything, but we've been much clearer with the claimants about what is eligible, what is not. Our payment summaries are clear and defensible and understandable and polite and professional. And so I think that's really helped us to get more connected with the people that we serve. We had the SCAP resolution adopted, and ECAP, which is a program that it doesn't matter where I go, Pittsburgh to talk at National Tanks or Coupa or anywhere else, people grab me and say, I have to talk to you about ECAP. They've helped us so much. They are closing sites. We have folks in that program that are technical experts. They meet with the regulators and the grantees and the consultants and develop a path to closure, optimize remedial systems. It's been a great success for us. Next slide. So there is a potential fund extension out there in the legislature, AB 1115. Sponsored and introduced by Diane Pappin of the Assembly, who has a great name and spells it right even, which is amazing. But anyway, one in. And she would want us to extend the cleanup fund and companion programs to January 1st, 2036. This would mean that we could continue to act as a financial responsibility mechanism, would allow some of those newer claimants. We have the single wall tanks, and then we also have double wall tanks that are approaching their 30-year warranty period. So that would make them difficult to insure. So it would allow us to help those folks, and it would provide a chance for them to get reimbursed. Next slide. So now on to our 3 mills authority. We always provide a recommendation for you as to the way we're going to split up that 3 mils of the 2-cent fee. We split it 3 ways between the RUST account, or the Petroleum Underground Storage Tank Financing account, site cleanup sub-account, and the school district account. We get about $47 million a year from that 3 mils. Next slide. We're proposing to keep it the way we had it, 85% to SCAP, because there's great need there, as I'll touch on in a minute, and 15% to the RUST account. You know, some folks have said, why don't we throw more over to SCAP? Well, because of all our outreach with the 40% increase in RUST and that approaching deadline, we need to make sure that we have enough money in that account to cover those folks. But that's what our recommendation is, and we have an opportunity here for the public to comment on that as well. Next slide. So usually DWQ does this presentation with me, but this time they gave me a few slides to talk about because we work very closely with them. They have all the non-fund cases, we have the fund cases, but we're basically doing the same work. And between us, we've got 41,000 cases closed, and we did 254 last year. Average case of closure, age of a case of closure is 21 years, which is too long, but we're working on that. And we still have about 1,800 cases left, 1,400 with regional boards, 325 with local oversight programs, which are now down to 6 LOPs is what we have, and we issue them grants as well. Next slide. So one of the things that we've been collaborating quite successfully with DWQ and EPA on is our stalled case initiative. We have 240 cases that are stalled, and I think I mentioned a lot of times that's funding, a lot of times we need a directive that's enforceable. So we've made some really good progress here. With the 174 cases we've closed, we've got 48 more closures in progress. We've gotten those numbers of directives. I'm not going to read the whole slide to you. We've got enforcement helping us with NOVs and draft ACLs. And where we come in is we can provide the funding to get these things moving. And there's almost 100 that we've done, and we have 28 additional applications. A lot of those are going to our orphan program, which is why we need the additional funding there. Next slide. So the last thing I want to leave you with, I had mentioned I would talk a little bit about the need for SCAP. Right now, that's basically a voluntary cleanup program because there's no other funding source for it other than us, and potentially DTSC has some money for them too. And there's about 5,400 sites in the cleanup program. And this allows us to clean up non-petroleum contaminants that are typically more toxic, more persistent in the environment, things like solvents, pesticides, heavy metals, PFAS, which we know is looming on the horizon there. So we have another 17,000 suspected contaminated sites, and about 40% of those we believe are within disadvantaged communities. So the numbers to clean these sites up are so astronomical, it might not even be worth mentioning here, but we're digging away. We've got 2% that are funded either voluntarily or with the help of SCAP. So that just underlines the need for that program and why we're so excited about it. And I think I just want to close by complimenting my staff because they have been just stellar. They're pretty unbelievable with all the plates they spin, and they've not only embraced the change that we're making over at the fund, but they've contributed valuably to it. So I'm very proud of them, and I wanted to say that. Any questions for me or Julie?
Well, I have to say I'm incredibly impressed and proud as well, and just thank you for your leadership, Diane, in all of this. I mean, the work that has gone on these last years to really find the essence of the program and here better deliver what are just very, as you've indicated, and we know needed dollars, very few dollars compared to the great need that we have out there is really appreciated. This work is quiet work. You know, the USD doesn't get you know, headlines often written about it, and good, because something tells me the headlines that would be chosen to be written would probably come off pretty bad. Because ultimately, we are incredibly proud of the work that's going on here. So thank you. And just look to any colleagues if there's any questions.
Well, I just love your updates. I look forward to them, and what amazes me is how you always find a way to improve the program even more. And so I just really want to compliment you all, your team. It's great to be in government service and see how you're just so efficient and always looking for how you can improve the customer experience. And I think that that's why you get the responses that you get. And it's too bad we don't have more programs in government like this. You're really a model that can be used. So just thank you so much.
And
Thank
I'm
you.
glad to hear that as you're out in the community, in the national community with other states that are struggling with very similar issues, that folks are coming to us. And I know there's a lot that we in turn then learn from folks out there. I kind of sitting here for a moment. I do have one question. It's just as we know, there's a move to shift away from petroleum. The infrastructure that's here. Do you see that? And I know much of the work right now is just actually improving here the infrastructure, the single wall tanks that would otherwise really damage groundwater in the interim. But do you see sort of other effects happening, I guess, as gas usage goes down, the mill, other sort of funding structures? I guess they, elegantly kind of go away with each other, if you will, as the dependence on it goes. But do you see, I don't know, much discussion around what that means for a program like the UST, or its kind of future, or are we still very much kind of really in a first phase of getting rid of really these single walled tanks that are still out there, and just improving the current infrastructure enough to not be damaging? Just kind of wondering.
Oh yes, we've had what we call the Future of the Fund group together for the last 4 years, talking about issues just like that. And I think that's one of the reasons, I'm speculating because it's not our bill, but I think it's one of the reasons that the sunset of the proposed it aligns itself with the governor's 2035 for no more gas vehicles being sold. And I think there's a natural progression. It's going to basically solve itself. But in the interim, we still have plenty of work to do. And there may be some morphing more towards a site cleanup, because the folks that we have that have been doing this UST work have all the skills needed to clean up other sites. So yes, we've thought about that. And I think that it's aligned pretty well, and it'll fix itself, but we still have work to do.
Thank you for that. Any other colleagues with questions? We have 3 commenters as well. Then we can go to our commenters. I believe first up we have Cindy Williams, who will be followed by Susan Garner, and then I believe in person we may have Eric Holm.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning. My name is Cindy Williams, and I'm with an environmental consulting firm who works with these UST owners and operators who have been going about cleaning up these releases over the last many years. I've been in this line of work for almost 30 years, and while most of these UST owners and their consultants have come to these meetings over the years to offer critiques of how the UST Cleanup Fund is operated, I just wanted to have the time to take a moment and recognize the hard work the Cleanup Fund management and staff have done and the results they've delivered. We've witnessed over the last 3 or 4 years the fund take proactive measures to really address the problems of the growing backlog of claims, and the results are indisputable, as Diane has talked about recently. There's just no more priority waiting list, in addition to being no more appeals. Claims are reviewed for eligibility timely. Processing of reimbursement requests has been exponentially faster than it has been a few years ago, all of which has created funding access to claimants to continue their cleanup efforts in an effort to achieve closure. Having that claim backlog reduced is a significant accomplishment and one worthy of recognition, as you all have just noticed, as it allows the state to continue to address ongoing releases in an expedited manner, and as we march towards that 2035 date. A big part of the success is attributable, in my opinion, to the fact that the fund assembled a team of internal and external stakeholders led by Diane that meet quarterly to share updates and find new ways to work together. California's fund was recently recognized, I'm sure you know this, at the National Tanks Conference in 2022 as a fund that had made vast improvements in its effectiveness. Diane and other California regulators presented their findings and best practices, and I know many of the other state regulators there were audibly appreciative of those efforts. So I just appreciate the opportunity you've afforded me today to share my perspective with the board. Thank you.
And thank you, Ms. Williams. I really appreciate your engagement in that group, in the work, and the voice of confidence, and what we know is an incredible turnaround with it. And to your point, it's through just really having an honest space to assess, understand, and communicate with those that we're serving within the program that really, I think, is part of the success here. And to Diane's leadership, just give good credit. So thank you. Really appreciate it, Ms. Williams. Next, I'd like to call up Susan Garner.
Good morning, Chair Esquivel and members of the board. I've testified before you before and with concerns over the fund and actually for, yes, for, several years as I've worked under different fund managers. I'd like to echo the comments of, of the board this morning in terms of the, I would say dramatic improvement and how the fund operates today. I did want to just touch a little bit on that. This wasn't part of what I was going to say, but I just want to touch on your comment, Chair Esquivel, on as we go forward, in terms of reducing our reliance on gasoline, what does that mean for the fund? And because I've been part of the working group with regards to AB 1115, and that was a concern that we heard, in terms of maybe we don't need this because we're not going to be using gasoline anymore. And so, one of the things that I think is important is that the double wall tanks that are in the ground today are nearing the end of their lifetime at 25 to 30 years. And so there are a lot of tanks in the ground that where, problems, I think we can anticipate that we'll see future problems. And of course, and these leaks, as Diane pointed out, they don't get cleaned up overnight. It takes, quite a long time. And as our state has relied on groundwater, going forward, any contamination of groundwater is an issue. And then the other thing is just the financial assurance mechanism that the fund provides, because even as we move towards electricity and cars, we're going to have tanks in the ground for quite some times. And the expense that our tank owners would bear without this financial assurance mechanism in place, would be substantial. And so I just wanted to, point out those two things because our group has given a lot of thought to, the importance of the program, for our state. And the other thing I'd like to say is just in terms of the appeals, because I've written a lot of appeals, essentially contesting payments, for my clients. And I think that the consistency that we see in the program today, I mean, I've certainly noticed it. It's been clear, it's been consistent, because in the past, it really relied on who the staff was that reviewed the claim. And so the inconsistencies made it really difficult to accept the payment amount. And I think that just goes to show two things. One, how much more efficient the fund is and how they can direct their attention, to upcoming claims and not have that backlog, because I know appeals are very time consuming. And it also points towards the staff that Diane has put in place in a number of places. She's been able to put staff in place who have really thrived, and it's been the right people in the right place. And some of those people I'd like to point out is Ben Henningberg in the SCAPS unit. He's fabulous and has consulting experience, and that kind of experience really shows through as as projects go forward. Bridget Freeborn, who actually processes claim applications, that program, now you cannot even submit a claim application without all the information in place. And Carol Sheehan in the technical review unit. And of course, Leka Potter, who's been the bedrock, of payments. So I can't say enough about Diane's leadership. It has been remarkable, and the turnaround the fund has made is dramatic. So thank you for your time.
Thank you for yours throughout the years here, Ms. Garner, through criticism and praise, and just appreciate again the acknowledgement of the work. To my mind, and I appreciate the comments on the future of the fund how we can be thinking about it, the lasting legacy that we'll still need to want to ensure there's a floor to, if you will, when it comes to the tanks that will still be within the state and their potential to harm groundwater. And on your comments around the efficiency of the program, to my mind, it's very similar to what's we're doing on the drinking water space and other places where it is a matter of needing to better standardize oftentimes terms and conditions and hear process and acknowledge that it also takes here the willingness of those on the other side of the program to accept those terms and to have faith that we've done our best to give everyone a fair space so that the appeal process is transparent and we can get to those good decisions sooner here all amongst us. And so just again, I appreciate the comments, and here for me the parallels and a lot of the streamlining I know we're doing in other spaces as we try to deliver infrastructure for drinking water or wastewater or what might have you. So just thanks for those comments.
If I could add something.
Oh,
I
please,
just want to
Diane.
say that the claimants have been terrific as well, and the stakeholders have been terrific in telling us what would work for them, and we've been working together, I think, really well. They've been submitting as we figure out the best way for them to submit, and it's really helped as well.
Fantastic. Thank you. And our last commenter we have is Eric Holm.
We on here? All right, great. Thank you. Good morning. And thank you very much for the opportunity to speak this morning. Coming unsolicited, some more complimentary and some more details as far as the progress the UST program has made over the last several years, especially under Diane's leadership. My name is Eric Holm, and I'm a consultant at Antea Group here based in Rancho Cordova, California. I've been in this industry since 1986, and I've worked with the California UST Fund since 1996 for 25 plus years with the fund. And during those 25 years, I've worked with a number of different fund managers and different fund staff, and I've worked under most of the companion programs that Diane has mentioned here. I've worked with school districts, I've worked with residential claimants, I've worked with major retailers, I've worked with small independents during those timeframes. And I can, during those 25 years, with the different fund managers and the fund staff, I can without a doubt, Diane and her staff has been exceptional in their management and their customer and claimant service. Customer service, treating the claimants as a customer was not always foremost. But I can tell you now that I get emails at 9 o'clock at night from fund staff responding to questions that I had. I get responses within 24 hours. Sometimes it would have to take 3 or 4 follow-up emails to get a response, but not now. Even with working through COVID, which didn't seem to be a hiccup or a pause with the UST Fund in their operations, or if anything, the timing may have actually improved. As currently, as mentioned previously by both the 2 other speakers and by Diane, the turnaround time on reviews of reimbursement requests, eligibility applications, appeals, questions, and everything has been quicker and more consistently than I or my clients have observed over the last 25 years. There's also an obvious change among the entire staff as far as their responses, as far as their treating the claimants as a customer and responding back. That has significantly led to quicker and, again, mentioned previously, and more consistent reviews. And some of the policies that Diane and fund staff have put in place have greatly attributed to that. It's obvious that although Diane has been critical in these improvements, the entire staff has also greatly contributed. And I'd like to acknowledge certain members who I've dealt with over the last several years intimately. Salika Potter, Regina Travasky, Bridget Freeborn, Christina Ochoa, Ben Henningberg, Carol Sheehan, Adrian Perez, Julie Osborne, and Audrey Shimuzu, and the rest of the fund staff. It has been such a change, and it's been so easy to work with these individuals and to assist them, what they're doing. Now, if I had one question that I could ask, the State Water Board used to have a link on their website that allowed anyone, if they had had a positive experience or something like that, to commend and bring to the attention of the State Water Board, individuals or a situation. I can't find that link anymore. I think it's been removed, or it's been put in a place that I just can't find. I would love to have that back. I've used it previously in the past when certain situations had come up and I had received exceptional service. And I'd really like to see if that could come back. So thank you very much for the opportunity to speak today.
Thank you, Mr. Holm, for your participation, longstanding participation in this program, and your words. I can't add anything further insofar as I just really appreciate your praise of what we know a lot of hard work. And as the vice chair said, within bureaucracies, you don't often get rewarding language like that. When it comes to the website, I'm always very interested in the website, and I appreciate you flagging that. I hadn't caught that we no longer had that link to be able to praise folks that have been engaged with in our programs, and I think it's a great thing that we can make sure we get back up there amongst a number of things on the site. So thank you, Mr. Holm. Really appreciate it. Board members, any questions, comments?
I will echo the amazing appreciation for staff and the program and public service, and how and also for the folks on the claimant side that have been helping us get to such a better place. And I think just in the time I've been on the board, I really appreciate all the reflections on what you've learned, and things that, some of which don't really lend themselves to other programs, but I think some do. And even just the sort of culture change a bit on thinking about customer service and efficiencies and approaches, and continued stakeholder engagement is just, I think, something we do in many other programs, but I think one we continue to learn from this program in particular and the success you've had. The only thing I wanted to mention was that I fully agree with the staff proposal on the proportion of funds. I think that's excellent. It is very sobering to see those huge numbers for SCAP, and we just had the last meeting at the resolution and vote on that, but appreciate that folks are seeing how important that is and how much more funding we're going to need over the coming years to make sure folks are safe and we can utilize the land we have for a lot of, I know that we heard from folks that are building affordable housing, and which we desperately need in this state. So just appreciate that thoughtfulness and continued work to balance those two, and other funds that this or programs, I guess, that this mill supports. So thanks.
Thank you, Board Member McGuire.
Yeah, I'll just echo all those comments. I don't really have too much to add. It's not every board agenda item where we come in, there's just everyone's singing your praises, but truly it's well deserved here. I think this is the fourth time I've heard this update, and every time it's gotten better and better and better in terms of the feedback that we've been hearing in terms of your efficiencies, your customer service, your responsiveness. You're checking all of the boxes in terms of what we hope any program at the board can truly accomplish. And so thank you for setting such a high bar for everyone else to follow as a model. And agree, it's not, all programs aren't the same. Yours is specific, but I really appreciate all the work you and your team have done over the years. So thank you for that. And just, I also like all the numbers and seeing the reports. And so the one that stuck with me today is just, 41,000 cases closed. And that just on its own, just setting aside everything else, 41,000 cases is an incredibly impressive accomplishment. Even in light of the fact that there are so many contaminated sites throughout the state, there's so much work to be done. It's no small feat to think of what you've accomplished here in the life of this program. So thank you for that work. Appreciate you continuing the march forward as long as it's authorized. we're able to continue that, and appreciate it.
Thank you.
You're here, board member. Yeah, the North American bureaucracy can sometimes have a reputation. This is a reputation I think that it should most be known for. And it's, I think we just have a lot of opportunity to continue to do great work here. So just thank you. I have nothing further. I also think the percentages work for me, and look over to the vice chair.
Yes, just because it's a short board meeting today and got a little bit of extra time, I thought I'd just share a personal story. So my father was a small businessman, and he had a gas station in Napa. And he not only had to clean up his site once, but twice. He was incredibly frustrated. He came from Italy and built this business, and we and the family all worked in the business. The girls were bookkeepers. My brother got to pump gas. And luckily, I was away in law school while they had this claim. But I do remember going home on the weekends. And my sister, who was doing the main bookkeeping at the time, had these binders. I remember there were these big blue binders. And she was always making copies and sending them to the state. And, she got frustrated as well. And it's just great to see the progress. And I'm expressing this because I think that there are, many businesses that have the wherewithal, but then there's that small business person that's out there. And I am sure that they would, if they were here today, express gratitude for this new and improved system. And just know that on a very personal level, what it can mean to small businesses and families, of course, to the benefits to the community for water quality, but then also having such a customer-friendly program, I think, can make a real difference in people's lives. So I just thought I'd share that with you today.
I'm so glad you did, because we talk about things like that all the time at the fund. One of the first things we did was put up pictures of properties that we've helped clean up. And I share, when I just received a comment from a small businessman who is 85, he didn't want to turn this problem over to his children. We put him in ECAP. We got his site closed after 29 years. And he's now got someone calling him about putting a fueling station, an EV station there. And he's just ecstatic. And that's what we're proud of being able to do. So thank you for that.
Incredible. Just thank you so much. And it's not lost on me, again, the importance to local economies that all this work, to your point, this really is. So thank you. That concludes this item. And let's go ahead and move on to item number 6. We still have about 40 minutes before 11. And so I think we'll have enough time for this discussion. Did we lose it? Morning, the vice chair and I were just saying the Sierra room is a little cozier here, but it is nice to be close.
I was just thinking how intimate it is, like face to face. Exactly. Absolutely. Well, good morning. We're going to present on the ELAP progress report, an information item for you. I will turn it over to able hands here with Christine Sotelo and Caitlin Hilty, who are our managers in the fund. And we have Kim Niemeyer here to support us as well in case we want to get into legal stuff, but it's not really a legal question we're talking about today. So, but we will go ahead and go through our presentation. So take it away.
Thanks, Darren. We can go to the next slide, please. Good morning, Chair Esquivel and board members who are absent, who walked out for a moment, but good morning to them. I'm Kate Hilty. I supervise ELAP's administrative operations. Really happy to be here this year to be able to provide you all an update on what's been going on with our program over the last year. Today, I'm going to cover the implementation assistance that we've been able to provide to our labs. And then I'm going to turn it over to our program manager, Christine Sotelo, who will cover some important observations that we've made, as well as what we see as our next steps moving forward. Next slide, please. So who are we? We are the Environmental Laboratory Accreditation Program, ELAP for short. It's our job to evaluate and accredit laboratories who are generating data that will be used by regulators to make really important decisions to protect public health and the environment. We do that through the assessment, monitoring, and enforcement of laboratories. And right now, we are the largest program of our kind in the country. We have around 550 labs that generate data for over a dozen California state agencies. So quick background, we haven't always been with the board. We used to be housed at the California Department of Public Health until the program was transferred here in 2014. And when we got here, things were not looking good for us. The program was not functioning effectively. So the board immediately commissioned an expert review panel to help us improve the program. They published a report of findings and recommendations. The recommendations, of which there are 5, were to ensure relevant analytical methods, expand our resources, enhance communication, implement a management system, and adopt a laboratory accreditation standard. So those 5 recommendations have really provided the roadmap for us for all the work that we've been doing since to improve the program. Thanks. So it was really critical that we adopted a new set of regulations in order to get the program on track. We did that. We spent several years working with both of our advisory committees, both of laboratory stakeholders, as well as our partners in other state regulatory agencies. We released 3 preliminary drafts to the public, and then incorporated their feedback. And then the board adopted those regulations in May of 2020. They became effective January 1st, 2021. So just over 2 years. And we committed then and are still committed now to assisting our laboratories transition to the new requirements and to providing updates to you all along the way, which is why we are here.
Yeah, it's not lost on me that as we adopted and the effective date came in, we were in the middle of COVID. And so all of our labs as well had to go through what was, I know an incredible period for all of us, still is. And the progress that we'll continue to hear about here, though, is commendable, especially amongst all that.
That's very true. There were a lot of laboratories who were working in shifts and not overlapping. So they were dealing with a lot of changes all at the same time and have really done an incredible job of kind of just being on their feet and doing what needed to be done. So there were some big changes in the new regulations. The first piece was really that the old ones were very, very vague, and that allowed for a lot of interpretation, both on behalf of ELAP as well as the laboratories. So we fixed that. We added a lot of clarity into the new regs, and the outcome of that is just that everyone is very clear on what's required to be a California ELAP accredited laboratory. We also introduced third-party assessments, which is assessments of laboratories that are performed by approved firms, and we did that in order to expand our resources. And the last major piece is the incorporation of the TNI standard, which is a consensus-based quality management system that laboratories use to help manage and document their operations. It's not required yet. We did adopt a 3-year transition period for the TNI requirements. So January 1st, 2024 is the required compliance date for that piece. Okay, now that we're caught up, I'm going to move on to talking about some of the implementation assistance we've been able to provide. Next slide, please. Right after we adopted the regulations, we immediately launched a compliance assistance initiative called the Roadmap to ELAP Accreditation. We started with a webinar about third-party assessments because that was brand new to the community, so we wanted to roll that out as early as possible. We launched a new website that had some really useful tools on it, and one really key component of this initiative that we put a lot of work and time into is what we called our transition appointments. And that is where we sat down, 3 or 4 ELAP staff sat down with one laboratory one-on-one, and we answered all of their questions that were specific to their lab and helped them chart a path to compliance for their laboratory specifically. So we were able to do that with around 125 laboratories that requested those appointments. We're still absolutely open to continuing these appointments. If anyone has a request, we are happy to fill that. We do also have ongoing assistance where, we have our general email inbox as well as our telephone line, and then we have a technical inbox too for more complex questions. Right now, we're getting about 150 contacts per month on our general line, and as 15 to 20 of kind of a more complex question that has to do with either regs implementation or TNI standard or analytical methods. So that's a service that we provide, just a normal customer service component for us. Next slide. The one project that we are really, really proud of and that has been super successful has what we call the TNI documentation workshop. It was a virtual class. There were 20 sessions. We kept the class sizes small, and it was specifically designed to help small laboratories implement the TNI standard in their laboratory. Next slide, please. As part of this training, laboratories received a set of really, really valuable tools. They received a learner's packet that was hundreds of pages that included fill-in-the-blank templates for all of the required policies and procedures that were in TNI, really, really thorough explanations as to what the criteria meant, how to comply with it, 3 examples for everything that was required that laboratories could just lift off the page if they chose to and implement it in their lab if they didn't have a policy or procedure for that requirement before, or that they could, take and use and tweak to make it work for them. And then all of the training modules are recorded and they're posted on our YouTube page where they will stay forever, most likely, because this is the only training like this in the country. There's nothing else like this that is free of charge to anyone that could want or need it. So it has been very well received by the community. And I just wanted to take the opportunity to say thank you to the board for sponsoring that so that we could make that available.
I know this has been a common theme of implementation of ELAP, but just the contributions that we've been able to provide for the community and for others out there, and resources like this in service certainly for our systems and our laboratories rather, but the benefit nationally is just appreciated. I think it's really helped us quickly kind of integrate into a community out there, and it's good to be part of a international community around the standards here that able to lend resources from and then also help provide. So
absolutely. Next slide, please. That brings us to our annual laboratory conference that we lovingly call ELAPCon. We're on our 3rd year of our conference. We love doing it. This year we are holding it from May 30th to June 1st. Our theme this year is Ready to Launch, and we are focused on the countdown to TNI. We're super excited about our keynote speaker. It's a gentleman named Michael Roberts. He is the lead scientist of the laboratory that's on the International Space Station. Yeah, so I think he's going to be zooming in from his office on Earth this year, but nonetheless, there is a laboratory there, and the director is going to be our keynote speaker. So we're thrilled to have him. We're also going to be highlighting a small laboratory from our community who's an early adopter of TNI. And we're also thrilled to share this stage with our Laboratory Technical Advisory Committee members, LTAC for short. They have a full day of technical presentations, so we'll get to hear from them about the things that they're experts in. So we'll be hearing about PFAS, aquatic toxicity, and the Orange County Beach Monitoring Program, among other things. So, next slide. Thank you. Mentorship was a key piece, an early piece of getting us to where we are. Before the regulations were adopted, we implemented a small laboratory mentorship program where we paired a handful of small labs with bigger labs that were successfully implementing TNI. We did this to pilot the standard in our state to make sure that it could be done before it got adopted. It was really successful, so successful that the TNI organization decided to adopt this model on a national level. So our staff worked with them to help them develop their version. And the laboratories that are listed on this screen are the ones who benefited or took advantage, of that opportunity. So we just wanted to give them a shout out here. And this is the last thing that I'll talk about today. This is a recognition initiative that we launched very recently where we were able to recognize about 100 of our laboratories who have successfully implemented the TNI or TNI -2 standard by passing an assessment to that before the compliance date of 2024. So we sent them these certificates that they could show to their executives at their agency or their communities or their board of directors. And we just wanted to say congratulations to all of them for their hard work and really leading the way for their community. Go to the next slide. Thank you, Margie. And that's it for me. Thank you for the time, and I will send you to Christine.
All right, thank you so much, Kate, for presenting the first part of this presentation. So I'm going to cover the observations after the first 2 years of adopting our regulations. I'll cover some key performance indicators, talk about our increased assessment capacity, some successes from our enforcement unit, and changes to the laboratory population that we've been seeing. Next slide. So the first thing I want to talk about is improvements to our performance. And you heard Kate talk about our regulations, how they were vague and unclear. It was hard for labs to comply, and it was hard for ELAB to implement the regulations. But through the adoption of our regulations, we've been able to see some improvements in our administrative processes. So the first one I wanted to highlight was how long it takes for our administrative staff to help laboratories complete their application. So we've moved from 2 weeks to review an application for completeness to 2.5 days. And this is really important for the laboratories because they want to know that their application has been deemed complete and is now going through the process so that they can get their certificate. The next performance metric I want to talk about is our average turnaround time for all applications. So that would be the acceptance of the application onto the issuance of the certificate. So this is the most dramatic change that we've seen in the program, from 171 days to 52 days. So as you can see, this is important to the laboratories because they really want their certificate so that they can run their regulatory samples. They can't sign contracts for work, they can't run any samples unless their certificate is in hand. So we really want to turn around this as fast as possible. So this includes reviewing the technical reports for blind proficiency testing, conducting the assessment if it's our ELAP staff, and even reviewing the third-party assessment reports if it's done by a TPA, and then the issuance to a certificate. So I think 52 days for us is amazing compared to our performance in the past. And the last key performance metric I wanted to talk about was how we've created a priority application list. And if you remember in our board update last year, we had a large municipal agency complain that we didn't give them enough time to correct the mistake that they made in their application. And so we did a root cause analysis and identified that if we prioritize those applications that have mistakes in them and respond to them within 10 days, they have enough time to fix it and they can continue to move along. So we've done that for the applications and have hit a 10-day target metric to get the information to them. So we're pretty happy about that. Next slide. So the next thing I want to talk to you about is our increased assessment capacity and the use of our TPA providers, which allows us to rapidly onboard new methods to meet our agency partner needs. So I have to say, this is a real game changer for us. We have been continually struggling with enough technical resources to do the assessments. I'm happy to announce that we are the first in the world to offer accreditation for microplastics. And it's because we have that additional capacity to immediately respond, learn the methods, allow the TPAs to do the assessments, and we wouldn't be able to do that without that capacity. We're also able to onboard new revised methods that agencies release, like CDPH's 123 TCP. So we were able to onboard that immediately. And the long-awaited EPA 1633 for PFAS we'll be offering that in May. We're also able to offer the method update rule methods from EPA. So what EPA does is they update methods, whether it be an editorial change or a technical update through quality assurance or quality control. And they take those methods that they update and they bucket them. And then they release them every couple of years. So we'll see maybe dozens or even hundreds of methods that are updated. And then as an accreditation program, we have to automatically offer them and then assess all the labs to these new methods. So we could not do that without this added capacity. And the last thing I want to talk about is our backlog. As you know, we used to have a drinking water backlog in the hundreds for our drinking water labs. So labs that didn't get an assessment for 2 years. So I'm happy to announce by the end of this summer, all of our laboratories will have their assessment within 2 years. And this is because of our increased assessment capacity. Next slide. So this is the successes from our enforcement unit. And as Kate alluded to, we didn't have a very good program previously while at CDPH, and we didn't have an enforcement component. So the industry was basically unregulated. So when ELAP moved over from the water board, from CDPH to the water board, we created a new enforcement unit with our existing resources. And since the regulations were adopted, we've nearly received over 100 complaint referrals from the state agency programs regarding the reports they receive or anomalies in the data that they've reviewed. And so we've taken many enforcement action, and some of the common ones are listed here. To date, since we've moved over to the board and created the program, we've issued almost 140,000 in citations for serious violations in laboratories such as fraud, data fabrication, or repeated violations of our progressive enforcement actions. So this unit is really keeping busy. But I don't want to just point out the fact that we're taking enforcement actions. We also have a compliance assistance component of the enforcement unit. Whenever we see an issue that is statewide or we see that is chronically happening throughout laboratories, we'll issue enforcement advisories. And so we have several of those on our enforcement webpage so that we can help labs comply and avoid the problems that the labs had previously. Next slide. So what you'll probably hear today and what you've probably read in your comment letters from the public is that there are changes in the accredited laboratory population, and we've been monitoring those. So last year, we reported to you that 45 laboratories relinquished their accreditation. About 2/3 of those laboratories were commercial. But this year, we want to report to you the bigger picture that we're seeing, the trends that we've seen since we've moved over from CDPH. Next slide. So what we've discovered is that there has been a steadily decline of laboratory population since we've been tracking our population since 2014. So before the regulations were adopted, when we moved over to the board, we saw a 3% decrease in laboratory decline. And then after the regulations, we saw a 5% increase, a slight uptick in the decline of laboratories, with a total shed of 25% of our population. At the same time, we've been monitoring vulnerable laboratories, and you heard a little bit about them from Kate. Those were the mentor laboratories that were located in a remote location, and those laboratories have not been impacted by, and they're still open, not closed. We call them vulnerable because they're in those remote locations. They run methods that have short hold times, and they are 2 hours or more away from a laboratory, accredited laboratory hub in California. So sending a sample to another laboratory is challenging. It's not impossible, but it's challenging, and it would just take really good planning. But we see those labs as keystones, so we're keeping our eye on those labs, and I'm happy to say that they're still open and doing business. Next slide. So here's a graph visually displaying what I just described. As you can see, the blue line is the total number of laboratories. The red line is the in-state laboratories, and the green line are the out-of-state laboratories. So we consulted with our water board economists to try to understand what was going on. And to paint the picture, previously, when the program was at CDPH, there was a ballooning of environmental testing industry. We had artificial low costs. The program hadn't raised their fees for over 10 years, and it was unregulated. There wasn't an enforcement component. So you had a ballooning of laboratories. At one time, I've seen documents that showed we had 800 laboratories. So we were really big at CDPH. And so after consultation with our economists, what we're seeing is the market correcting itself. We're seeing the right sizing and normalizing of the industry, and we're moving closer towards economic equilibrium in this market industry. Next slide. So many of the labs that relinquish their accreditation are still operational. We see that as good news from a jobs market perspective. So when we reported out to you last year, 45 labs relinquished their accreditation, and we surveyed them. 19 of them are still operational, meaning if it's in a municipal laboratory, they are conducting process samples or they're sending their regulatory samples out to accredited laboratory. Or if it's a commercial lab, they might decide that they're going to engage in environmental testing that's not for regulatory submittal to any of our programs that we offer accreditation for. 8 of those laboratories actually closed. 1 responded and they went to another industry, I believe cannabis, and they're regulated by the Department of Cannabis Control. And then 17 other laboratories didn't respond to us. So we just see this as a good sign that not all 45 laboratories have closed their doors. Next slide.
Ms. Sotelo, I have a follow-up question there.
Sure.
First of all, thank you so much for this deep dive. You know that many of us have been concerned about closures, and so I think this helps to put it in the proper context. But looking at the smaller labs in particular, if you could go back one slide. Back. There we go. Because I think you said that a lot of the smaller labs are still open, but maybe some have relinquished accreditation. So if you could just spend a few more moments on this slide, focusing in particular on the smaller labs.
So maybe I'll hand it over to Kate since she actually did the specific research.
Yeah, thanks, Christine. Sure. So I don't have the breakdown of which of these were smaller or which may have been a bit bigger. I don't recall having seen any large laboratories close since the regulations were adopted. So I think the assumption that these are small to medium-sized laboratories, all of the count that are in here is a fairly safe assumption. And what we were really trying to get at is understanding if these folks are out of jobs or if they are still able to, if they've been able to maintain their positions, because that was something that we heard during the regulations development period there was concern over job loss. So we feel fairly good about the results that we got. I think the laboratories that are still operating in-house and are able to perform process control samples like in the moment, and then have their regulatory samples tested by an accredited laboratory. Those small laboratories also do still have other options if they wanted to have another party come and evaluate their competency. There are external organizations who do that. So, ELAP is not the only way that they can have kind of the stamp of approval to ensure that they're, performing their testing competently. Was that what you were looking for?
Yes,
member?
yes, thank you for that. And then on the issue of sort of the market correction, do you have an opinion as to the smaller labs? Just not as many in those areas, and so are you not seeing sort of that market correction that you're seeing in other areas?
I think Christine's next slide will touch on this when talking about capacity. So maybe I'll let her deliver that, and then we can, if you still have more questions, happy to take them.
No, I would just add, we do have, if you think about it, there's the commercial entities that are just a separate laboratory doing that work. There are the laboratories at the wastewater or drinking water facility itself that then do that. And I think we heard a lot back when we were doing the regulations that people were using the accreditation as kind of like a proof of lab, even though they were maybe not running the samples that needed to be accredited at the treatment facilities themselves. And so I think some of these that we see here are those. They're still operating. They're doing the job they did before, which was processing. They just, relinquish their accreditation because it isn't necessary for the work they're doing. And as mentioned, there's other ways to prove that they're working well without having to go through an accreditation process and pay our fees and the like. So that should be there.
All right, so the next topic is meeting our regulatory testing needs. So I want to point out that this is our primary metric for our primary clients, which are the state agencies, and we exist to offer accreditation for their monitoring needs. So despite the reduction in the laboratory population, we are seeing that all the regulatory testing needs are being met here in California. And just an interesting fact is that we did some analysis of all of the drinking water samples done in California, and there's a group of laboratories that cover about 80% of the testing in California, and none of those laboratories have closed or relinquished their accreditation. So the fear that there is this public health risk of drinking water samples to be analyzed, I think that we feel comfortable saying that we're covered in that area. But we wanted to be sure that what we were seeing and researching was accurate. So we surveyed our state agency partners, and we covered interviews with the big 3 areas of our accredited methods. So we talked to the executives from DTSC, hazardous waste, from the wastewater programs, state water board, and regional boards, and then drinking water division. And we asked them if they were seeing any testing capacity problems, and they responded that they were not. So that was our verification. We also took the opportunity to survey them about our customer service because, as Kate mentioned, we had an expert panel, and we essentially had a rift with all of the state agency partner agencies. They weren't satisfied with our customer service. They didn't think that we could remove labs that were committing fraud, that we weren't offering the methods that they wanted for their regulatory needs. And so we asked them those same questions, and I'm very happy to announce that they're very satisfied with our customer service. We also wanted them to know that there was a decline in laboratories and let them know that we have had a decrease. And one of the agencies was very happy about the quality of laboratories as opposed to the quantity. They would rather have labs that give them TNI quality than a lot of labs that they can't guarantee the reliability and the defensibility of the data. But we are still committed to continuing to monitor and assist in any, if any capacity issues arise. And so I want to share a story of a laboratory in Imperial County that was that closed because of our enforcement action. The laboratory was engaging in unethical laboratory practices and fraud, essentially, and closed. The market responded. A larger laboratory in the area came in and opened a satellite laboratory. They quickly submitted an application to us and requested for an assessment. So the way that we helped that community was we prioritized the assessment and review of the application, and we were able to help that laboratory open right away to support the water systems in that area and that community. So we're keeping an eye on it, and I think that's a positive note of a laboratory closing. I think the community is probably better served from a better lab than the one that was previously there. Next slide. So moving forward, we're going to begin with a new compliance assistance initiative, and we're going to continue to follow your direction on a light touch of enforcement of the TNI requirements. And we'd like to discuss with you a new fee structure idea that we're thinking about. And I'll talk about that in a couple slides down. Next slide. So we have a new compliance assistance initiative where we're working with our LTAC to partner and co-create solutions to help our laboratory community comply with the regulations. And so we'll be sending out a survey soon. So for any laboratories that are watching today, watch out for that survey because we want to know the areas that you're having problems so that we can focus on those and develop solutions with our LTAC. Next slide. And then I just wanted to remind everyone that TNI is going to be effective or required in laboratories January 1st, 2024. There's still a little bit of confusion on when they should be complying, but I just wanted to remind everyone of that. And we plan to survey laboratories to understand the landscape of labs that are complying with TNI and are not. But still, we will focus on assistance and a light touch of a progressive enforcement. Next slide. So the last topic I want to talk to you about is a new fee structure that we'd like to propose and work with the stakeholder community to develop it. So the current fee structure model is really what we adopted from CDPH, and it's dependent on population. And so you heard a lot today about the population declining. So the fee structure is sufficient to fund the program, but it would require some significant increase year over year in laboratory fees. And we know this because of the changes that we see in the population and because the use of TPAs has daylighted this issue with our revenue. But we're sensitive to the cost and increases that the laboratories have experienced, so we want to explore a new fee structure. Next slide. So one of the ideas that we have is to consider new options to align with other water board program fees and some other states that do the same thing, which is a volume-based discharge. So think confined animal facilities, they charge based on number of cattle. The drinking water division charges per connection, and the wastewater permits charge per gallon discharge to waters of the state. So we are thinking of some sort of volume-based discharge. And what this would do, it would have benefit to be less burdensome on the smaller laboratories that do less regulatory work. So we're not in charge of this adoption of new fee structure, but we will be working with the Division of Administrative Services and the stakeholders to develop this option idea and maybe others that they might have. And you will see this item likely at the September 2023 board meeting on fees. We know this is really quick. It's only 5 months, but we believe it can be done. You probably will hear from the stakeholders and comments that this is a condensed stakeholder collaborative process and maybe a departure from the more longer, meaningful timeframe to develop a different fee structure. So that's what you'll likely hear, but we're committed to helping DAS move forward with some fee structure to address the potential raise in fees based on the decline in labs. Next slide. And that's it for me. Thank you. I wanted to that's it.
Just thanks. Both having heard the previous item and now this one, both examples of just really good work that's been done to really improve programs here that have a huge impact on communities. And this, when it comes to our labs, it's so fundamental, as you all know, to our decision-making space. That confidence that the data that we have is the best data we can provide so that we can be protective of public health and here assess and understand the quality of our waters. And so the program is really foundational, fundamental, and really appreciate the good work that's gone on to just build up a more enforceable program, and appreciate again the explanation and the deep dive into what are we seeing in the laboratory industry and what what does it mean to see this sort of pruning. And I have confidence that we still have coverage, and importantly, this does come at cost. Certainly, we always were very honest that the administrative program that was there prior the fees hadn't been raised, and transitioning to something that was going to be more robust was going to come at cost, but it's worth ultimately the cost. And especially I appreciated, the resources that we now have to be more responsive, to incorporate things like microplastics, to be more on the ball, if you will, when it comes to incorporating new standards and responding to what we're seeing in the environment, and ensuring that, again, the laboratories are able to respond with us and provide that space for decision making. So just thanks all around. I am supportive of the transition to this more sort of equitable fee structure, if you will, when really taking into size for the labs, so that as we make adjustments to the program, hopefully everyone sees it as, as you said, similarly to other programs, size in a way that doesn't harm our smaller labs. And so I'm supportive of trying to do it this year. Hopefully folks can come along with that as well. But the question, I guess, is if it gets pushed over into next year, does it forestall what, again, it's sounding like might be some need to increase the fees to just account for current workload? And yeah, probably better to get it done sooner rather than not, as that sort of need kind of accrues. And that would be like a year and a half before really, and especially, fees are adopted in the fall, it's still not till the next year that they apply. So we're several years out. So I imagine that's why there's a desire to get it done by the fall. Just wondering if it gets kicked over a year, what impact that might have.
Yes, I'll take that one. So we're definitely know it's a big challenge to try to get a fee structure in place, but the reality is your choices are about a 50% increase of fees or a rejuggling of that. And I've always made the comment that, it doesn't change the area under the curve that we're adopting. It would just change the shape of the curve and spread the fee burden differently amongst the group, which is what we're proposing to do here. There's only so many ways to cut the math on it. There's going to be people that don't like it and people that like it. I mean, we're really talking about some winners and losers, and the winners would be smaller and the losers will be the larger labs. Undoubtedly. And so that becomes certainly a policy question that we'll bring to the board in September. And if we don't get it done then we'll face an overall increase, and then we can continue to talk about it. That's certainly not an invalid choice. It just seems that it's appropriate that when you're facing that big, it can help focus your attention on it, and then make a decision that would be hard under any circumstances. Certainly it provides a balancing when you're facing how to do it. So that's what we're thinking as we head into it.
Great, appreciate that. We have a few commenters, about 3 signed up currently. And please, but board members, any questions or comments prior? Board Member McGuire.
Thank you. Yeah, appreciate that. Thank you for the presentation. Really encouraging to see all the good work that's happened. And I remember, voting on this regulation and the work that led up to that. And it was, not easy coming up with the path forward. And I, in particular, appreciate the transition period and the opportunity to train the labs, to have the mentorship program, to have all these different tools available for them. But I'm also thinking about the fact that January 1st, 2024 is coming quick. It'll be here very fast. And I'm a natural procrastinator. I don't know about you, but that's something that, I'm always tending to wait till the end. And I was seeing your report about the number of labs that have received certificates so far, about 100 labs. And so doing some quick math, that still leaves several hundred labs that haven't actually moved over to TNI yet and received their accreditation under that program. So just wondering if you have some thoughts about your resources and bandwidth, if you were to get a deluge of applications here in the next few months. Do you have a plan for tackling that, all those requests coming in a short period of time?
I'm going to hand it over to Kate, who's the supervisor of our team.
Yeah, that's a really good question, board member. So the way our program works is they apply on a rolling basis. So their application date is the same no matter what. Every 2 years, they apply at the same time over the full calendar year. So we wouldn't get a deluge of applications that we would have to handle all requesting TNI. The survey of laboratories, the ones who have not been assessed to TNI yet, is how we intend to kind of get the landscape of where everybody's at early next year. And
I'm also a procrastinator. I get it. I think there's a lot of hope though, right? So laboratories, once they go through an assessment, they get a list of findings that they then get to correct. And that process in and of itself helps them come into compliance with TNI. So the 400 laboratories that haven't been assessed to it yet, the actual assessment is a compliance tool itself. And so I think that combined with, our progressive enforcement and assistance approach in 2024 kind of gives a buffer period. I don't want to make it sound like it's not required on January 1st, 2024, because it is, but the consequences for not being perfect on that day are very low. So,
Yes, thank you. I'm mindful of the light touch approach, and I know that was subject to much conversation around adoption. So thank you for that, and thanks for the reminder about the rolling nature of the process. Appreciate that.
I would just add quickly as well, I think we can expect that there will be a certain number that just drop away on that date. We had a recent enforcement action, and it was very clear that they were going to operate to the last minute and close the doors on January 1st. And so preparing us for, there will be a number that have decided not to do it and are, operating temporarily now, but we'll close out. Hopefully that's not a lot, but certainly there will be a number of them.
Thank you. Thank you, board member. We have about 4 commenters, and we can start to hear from them. Let's start with Judy Morgan, who will be followed by Carolyn Ratan, and then Debbie Mackey.
Hello, good morning. My name is Judy
morning.
Morgan. VP and Chief Compliance Officer for PACE Analytical and the current LTAC Chair. I want to start off by thanking you all for allowing me to share a few words today. It's also important that I thank the ELAP staff and for their leadership and the LTAC members for their engagement and passion for the entire, environmental stakeholder community. On behalf of the lab industry and my interactions with LTAC and ELAP, I think it's important to note the current status of the analytical world. Just as a little bit of information, as the industry has matured, many programs have developed from federal all the way down to the state levels. And not surprisingly, agencies and labs have been forced to switch gears and adjust over this time and have gotten many opportunities to get better at sudden change. Since 2014, the ELAP program changed direction and has evolved into a stronger program with higher engagement with the stakeholders. Since the decision to adopt the TNI standards, California has gone above and beyond to support the laboratories in that transition ahead of the official start date of January 1st of 2024. I applaud them for this. They have worked to provide resources, assistance, and support to help the labs be successful as they have moved to adopt a well-known quality system that has been revised and refined to specifically strengthen processes in the environmental analytical laboratories of all sizes. In addition, ELAP has developed training for the lab community and has added an annual conference with a design to focus on changes in meeting the needs of the laboratories. Also, as mentioned by Christine, LTAC and ELAB are working together to craft a survey to target the accredited labs to understand gaps in the application process, ELAP service, and potential challenges for compliance. At the end of the day, the overall focus is the generation of data of known and documented quality based on a consistent and comprehensive quality foundation. While there have been many shifts in the industry, it's important to understand that the overall number of labs has decreased. This may be due to consolidation and acquisition or labs simply going out of business. Either way, the California program is in the remaining labs that will pick up the cost to close the gap on funding the program. That's a little bit of a concern, just simply because if a new fee structure is the answer, getting something viable and known and understandable by September 23rd, I think is not a sufficient time to consider all of the viable options and work with all of the stakeholders. Depending on the changes in the fees, laboratories could be significantly affected. And in some cases, commercial labs outside of California may actually opt to drop from the program, shrinking it more. And then municipal labs may refocus their labs on process monitoring and hire another lab to perform the compliance analysis. Not that any of these are tragic. They are, however, things that must be considered because it will change, obviously, the budgeting. In the current market, all of the labs are struggling with increases in the cost of supplies, decreases in candidates to fill vacant positions for both replacement and new openings, and fluctuations in the number of overall project samples. Quite honestly, it's difficult to manage costs in the current economic landscape. They are also a primary driver of business decisions for laboratories. It may be the difference of whether or not to adopt T&I, pare back, stay open, or close altogether. These changes are happening all across the country, in our stakeholder communities, and in other industries as well. In close, we will continue to work together as ELAB, LTAC, the stakeholder community, the agencies, to keep the environmental monitoring and compliance strong for successful protection of the environment and public health. Thank you all for your time and allowing me to speak. I wish you all a great rest of the day.
Thank you, Ms. Morgan, for your time and your service as current chair of the LTAC and work here with us on these issues, and including the fee structure. I appreciate your comments. More to discuss, certainly. So thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Next, I'd like to call up Carolyn Rattan, be followed by Debbie Mackey, and our final commenter will be Jared Voskel.
And Chair Escobar, it appears that we have not had Ms. Rattan join us. She was listed as necessary or if necessary. So
yeah. Thank you for that, Mr. Lawfer. And so next we'll go to Debbie Mackey.
Good. I guess we're still morning, Chair Escobar and members of the board. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today on this matter. And as you know, we have been, I'm, by the way, I'll reintroduce myself. I'm Debbie Mackey. I am the Executive Officer of the Central Valley Clean Water Association, or SWRCB. And as you know, we've been very engaged in this, and I appreciate today's report by ELAP on just the outreach that they have done. I did also want to let you know as for SWRCB and for my other Clean Water Summit partners, including CASA, BACWA, Clean Water SoCal, and CWEA, we also have been very active in supporting our laboratory community to achieve compliance with these new regulations. And so I also want to applaud them. Board Member McGuire, I will tell you is our laboratory community has not been procrastinating. They have been on it. They're working hard. This has been a real heavy lift, but we see a lot of we see a lot of effort and work, and I'm very proud of them too. So with that, I did want to just comment on a few things. I know there's some talk on the fee structure, but I think more importantly, really with SWRCB, what we are concerned about is again our labs and our lab viabilities. We do know, and I appreciate Mr. Bohemus's comment. We do know that we are going to lose more laboratories, whether or not those laboratories stay open, or in a sense that they're doing process monitoring, or they are completely closed down. We are not sure. I did want to let you know is, yes, right now we haven't seen capacities, but there are, recently, last week or last 2 weeks, we had a discussion at the CWEA conference. There are issues with capacities. We're seeing laboratories, commercial laboratories, where our results are coming in later and later, to the point where some of those quality assurance checks that we normally do we're not able to come back with. So I do think we're going to see the market move around a lot. We're going to see laboratories move around a lot in the coming year. And hopefully we are going to all succeed. I mean, I think that you see most of us really working to do that. I did have a question because I know that LTAC has been, the engagement of LTAC has been really important to us. And I appreciate just that last comment. However, I also saw like on the website and, we watch for those LTAC meetings that there really hasn't been a full LTAC meeting, maybe since July of 2021. And so I was curious and we wanted to find out more on how LTAC was being utilized. And I don't know if I should pause or if we could get some more information on that. And then lastly on the cost is we have, I'm like, besides the increase in fees that we've seen from in this program, many of our laboratories, increased cost of implementing TNI, the increased cost of getting on-site assessments. In looking at this, really, I think it is very important to engage the stakeholders and engage them sooner rather than later. Whether we think we can do this by
Oh, apologies, Ms. Mackey, you are on mute.
In laboratory community over the next year, and whether it makes more sense to do a wholesale change now or later, that would be another thing. But I'd also encourage that we look for other ways to support the program. For example, is should the laboratories be supporting the development of these new methods that other state agencies want? What is the best way? Does it make sense to do it on a, this idea of maybe per gallon might be the way to move? Is that the best way? Or are there other ways? Because you're going to have not all labs doing things. There's a lot of variability. So I really would encourage not to wait, not to get a pathway forward or a determined pathway forward right now, but to strongly engage the laboratory community in this right now, and to consider whether a large change is needed now or later. But I will also tell you the laboratory community hearing this 50% is, overall, we heard the costs weren't going to go up, but we know that this loss of labs is an issue. So I'm happy to answer any questions, but just really thank you for the time. Thank you for ELAP's presentation. I look forward to more. I look forward to hearing more about what some of those additional statistics that we've been looking for and asking for as Clean Water Summit partners, to understand numbers of laboratories, what staff is doing what, and how much time that is taking, so that we can understand the program and provide the best input.
Thank you, Ms. Mackey. I appreciate your engagement. I recall, and as Board Member McGuire said, the discussion in the run-up to even adoption, there was a lot that we went through, and I appreciate folks continuing to be here, looking to contribute to the success of the program. On your question, I guess, on the last time LTAC met, has it been a year or not? And maybe there was just someone may have missed a notice or whatnot if folks met prior. And to your point, Ms. Mackey, yes, right now, we need to make sure we're engaging with folks, especially around the fee discussion. And I think now's the time to kind of gather all the best ideas externally, internally, and try to have a good cogent engagement. But Ms. Sotelo, yeah.
So to answer Debbie's question about LTAC, they have been working in a subcommittee to develop a guidance document on regulatory testing, onboarding new regulatory testing methods into our accreditation. And so they've been working outside of official meeting, but I believe we're going to schedule one later this year, I think in December, once that subgroup has gone past a certain milestone.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that, Ms. Sotelo. Thank you, Ms. Mackey.
Thank you.
Next, I'd like to call up Jared Boskel. I believe that'll be our final commenter on the item.
I remember being a child at the rolling rink is going to birthday parties and spending all day there. And always really fun when they brought out the limbo stick for Chubby Checker, and everybody had to kind of lower to see how they could go. For the record, my name is Jared Voskel. I'm Manager of Regulatory Affairs for CASA, the California Association of Sanitation Agencies. CASA represents 130 public agencies that provide wastewater collection, treatment, cycling, and resource recovery services. We're here for a report out on 2 years of implementation of regulations that were adopted about 3 years ago, right at the beginning of COVID. And this report out is, about how have these regs been implemented. And as we talk about it, it's really this T&I standard that laboratories have to utilize to maintain their accreditation. This is a standard of administrative documentation. Its inception was for handling of hazardous waste. So you'd really want somebody shadowing you at every step of your handling and processing one of these samples. And then from that framework, it became a broader standard that was used in other contexts. But during the adoption hearing, we heard proponents mention you don't really need this unless you're doing business across state lines and you don't know if you have equivalent standards. This is a uniform standard that allows you to do that. And so the state pursued that because of the condition we found our laboratory accreditation program in. It was ready to go, usable, could be picked up on day one. And so now we're giving that report out. So I thought it was important just to kind of provide that context of how we're seeing this and how we're understanding what's being reported here. And interestingly, in the initial statement of reasons for the rulemaking, it estimated 10 labs would be the labs that would drop out on account of the regs. So now we're at 150 and we're not in full effect. And so we're having a conversation about a funding shortfall, but it's not just the funding shortfall. I think there's a broader issue for our community where we feel like since this could happen and we communicated it, but we weren't heard or we weren't listened to. And in future proceedings, there is a sense we do want to be trusted, or we're coming here not to, grandstand. We're coming here to really try to partner and collaborate on our efforts. And so we were concerned there'd be a lab population decrease, but I was very encouraged by the report today that decrease in labs hasn't decreased in capacity issues. It hasn't decreased in service. And that is bar none the most important thing. We're talking about environmental laboratory testing. And so I don't want to make sure that's not lost in this discussion that hasn't happened. But in terms of, the program and it's being funded going forward, that question really is the one hanging out there. And because we're estimating more labs to drop out next year also before the regulations are fully in effect, I think there's a lot of merit to this idea of providing a lot more time to figure out how do we revise and restructure the fee, because ultimately that number could go lower and we don't know where it's going to go. It would be beneficial perhaps to have a range of estimates of what if we lose this many more. And then before we really begin to explore options for how to amend the structure of the fee. Another thing, I'm not sure if it's been mentioned, and I think from our perspective, we do have questions as our members in the laboratory community about, is the program fundable? Is it sustainable at this level, or do there need to be changes? And I think in subsequent updates, it'd be beneficial to hear about how staff have been transitioning, because I know they've talked about it. Some people aren't doing so many on-site assessments because that's going to third-party assessors or different things like that, evaluating proficiency data. And so as we understand, is there opportunity or all options on the table? Are there vacancies that could be left open and then not filled kind of long-term to help decrease program cost? I leave it to you all and your discretion and your wisdom here to determine that. But I think we would be curious to know if that's one of those things that would be considered if, it wouldn't be harmful to the program. And then in terms of the request about LTAC, we really just want to reiterate what Debbie said. LTAC is very underutilized, and they have a great batch of folks that have been in there. I know we have several representatives from our community, but even the commercial labs that are serving in there, just really, really great, profound work and expertise they have. And so I think they'd be fantastic to really stick on this problem and have them try to help figure out maybe labs wouldn't drop out if there was some more support they had and they felt like they could handle it. I would say, in terms of this LTAC subcommittee, there was definitely a perception issue of why are we looking to accredit experimental methods, or why are we looking to accredit emergent methods? There's like a US EPA process for that. And given the resources of ELAP, is that where it should be going? There kind of was that question from our folks. But that said, there are emerging methods and issues like microplastics. And so I think The work that SCORP did is a really great case study with ELAP in terms of getting that method out there. I think the Moore Lab is now accredited to perform samples, and having them as a resource is really great. But there is that kind of dynamic with our folks. And then when I speak to our agencies, a lot of these small municipalities are really, really struggling under the buckle, under the weight of bringing in another person to perform this administrative documentation T&I requires. Having somebody there shadowing them, documenting everything, not doing any sampling, not doing any laboratory service, to bring that person in, they're not getting that. So they feel more stretched. They feel like the training issue. And so they're really feeling that burden. And in some cases, labs that planned, we'll hire 2 people, found that they needed 3 people. I know this is all anecdotal, and there have been a lot of anecdotes swapped, good and bad, but I would just share the stories I'm hearing from my members out in the field are of that nature. And then finally, in terms of just, year over year, I think at least for the next couple of years, it would be beneficial to have some of the information we requested to be charted in a table. And I get that it's all publicly available, or it could be pulled from disparate resources, but if it was condensed and systematized so we could really see it, I think that would be helpful for us to really understand it. So with that, I'm happy to conclude, and thank you for your time.
Thank you for your comments, Mr. Bosco. Appreciate it. Colleagues, any other questions, comments? Board Member Firestone.
Great, thanks. And thanks for all the commenters and really great presentation. And I think incredible progress that we've made, clearly. I really wanted to just share some of my reflections in what we've learned from this transition and what I've appreciate about how we've approached it. One is just, this is such a model of how we can assist in transition to brand new requirements. It's pretty remarkable what staff have done in terms of the different pieces of the roadmap. 125 individual appointments is amazing. In addition to the training, like providing free trainings and templates, and the model of that, I think, is one that I would love to see us look to in new programs like conservation efficiency, which I know is not this program, but just to share, I think there's such an amazing model of how we're really trying to assist folks in really fundamentally new requirements and making that successful. Also, in particular, the attention and time that's gone into really tracking the trends in vulnerable areas. Again, would love to, I think a model for other areas and new regs like conservation efficiency is, where are the vulnerable areas? How are we understanding the trends, and proactively making sure that those areas that are most vulnerable have access to the laboratory services before there's a closure. And then also agree with the focus on the goal here is regulatory testing needs. Are we meeting that? It's not the number of labs, and it's what's the quality of services and results that we're getting. Also, job retention is ideal. Making sure that labs have their operational needs met is important. So I really appreciate tracking that. But I also think, I'm most familiar, obviously, with a lot of what we're really trying to see in terms of consolidation of fragmented drinking water systems. As an example, I think this is something where there's some real benefit of economies of scale and having the expertise and service and reliability to be able to meet the regulatory needs and the high standards and demands that we're continuing to place on labs that are vital to safeguarding Californians and the environment. So I appreciate the real focus on, are we meeting the testing needs, and particularly those vulnerable areas where, hopefully that anecdote that was shared on when a lab closes, it's not that that there's an opportunity for a new lab to open, and that they are in those areas where they need it, just from maybe a larger company, and that can meet the standards that we have. And I don't know how much we're able to or are tracking that, but it would be interesting to see, are we seeing new branches in terms of increases just as there's closures? So, and then finally on the fees, strongly agree we need to go volume-based. We need to address a more equitable building in of economies of scale, and the reality of the changing regulatory community or regulated community. I don't, I trust that there's a really robust stakeholder engagement process, because I've seen that in our fee programs, and I know usually we try to spread that out over a year. This would be very condensed if we try and do it in September. I certainly think we should make a transition as quickly as possible, just in terms of making sure that we are funding the costs that we have and doing that more equitably, but also recognize that there's that this would be a major shift, and there's a lot of information we need to go through with stakeholders to understand what the impacts would be and what the right approach, sort of more details how the numbers work out. And then also I'll just say, we see all the time, especially in these new fee transitions, that we reflect on them every year. We see population or we see fee payer population change and cost change, and we adjust it every year. So even if, even as we make a transition, we can adjust in the next year as needed. And I do worry if we continue to put things off or put them off too much, that there will be, and some, ideally we have a little bit more of a ramp rather than just a huge spike. This will be a big increase, I think, especially for some, no matter what, but I wouldn't want to keep putting that off to the point that it's too large. I think that was, so I don't have, I guess I trust staff on what's feasible to do what we need to do in terms of the timeline to make that transition. It's always good to be aiming sooner rather than later, but that's it. Thanks.
Thank you, Board Member McGuire.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to comment briefly on the fees, and I too am supportive of transitioning to a more appropriate fee model that represents the nature of the labs that we have today. And so if it's a volume-based approach or some version that's reflects that in a more equitable sense, I'm supportive of that. I am a bit nervous about the timeline, given that we are in May and September will come quickly. And I won't reiterate my previous comments about timelines and deadlines and things, but what I will say is that if it's not clear yet when the next stakeholder engagement meeting would be for the ELAP fees, I think we should work with Division of Administrative Services and get that broadcast as quickly as possible, and make sure that we're working with the regulated community as much as we can here to identify what different options should be considered. So I think it is possible to get this done. I wouldn't rule it out, but I think the comments about there is some uncertainty here about how many additional labs could decide not to seek TNI certification going into the new year, and we don't really know what that number is. It's just something that we should be cognizant of. And I think I appreciated the comments about looking at ranges and just acknowledging that there, it is an annual look at the fees, But if we're going to a new model, let's make sure we have some, confidence that it will be the right model for some years to come. But thank you again for all your presentation today.
Yeah, thank you, board member. On fees, for me, I think it'd be good to get it done. And I think that we can, if folks are focused and really on working through well and listening to one another to meet a deadline here of the fall. And especially because I think a number of the changes, whether or not there is additional atrophy from the number of laboratories we have, will still be important to make nonetheless. And really, especially on the volumetric kind of shift, really doesn't, yes, we should be aware and understand if more labs will go out of service, but I think some of the fundamentals there of the shifts that are looking to be made in the program don't, additional labs coming in or out wouldn't change whether or not we'd want to shift to those. So maybe if, we could think of it that way, knowing we'd come back in a year afterwards and do it all over again as well, might be helpful. Vice Chair, anything further?
I don't have anything to add, just concur with board member McGuire, just really trying to balance the need to move quickly, but at the same time be thoughtful. And so I think what I will do is if you could get the information out to us on the ELAP fee meeting, I'd like to tune in if possible. Thank you.
Thanks.
If I could just wrap up, thank you so much for that. Since we were waiting for this meeting to see how the board felt about it, we'll move with haste to get some models forward and work with the community to schedule a series of meetings on it, and certainly make it our goal to have a good conversation before the decision can be to adopt it, hopefully, or always put it off, or have it in phases as well, right? I mean, that's certainly another option that we'll want to explore with the community on it to try to not be super upsetting. So we will work hard to make that happen and bring that forward and hopefully see what we can come up with. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Polhamus. Thank you. Appreciated the presentation. Appreciated the good discussion and everyone's engagement. More to discuss. And so that concludes discussion around item number 6. I apologize. I know we have not taken a break, and we have time constraints for some of the folks that are participating in the next item. So folks should feel free to do so and take a break as necessary. But let's go ahead and start moving into our next item, which, as we said at the top, we were saving item number 3, our informational item, for a moment when DWR and here Director Namath could join us for, at the top here, some discussion. I know we have currently our folks coming first with the hydrologic update. We'll go ahead and first to Director Namath, and then we'll come back on the back end with our work on that. So we're at item number 3, our current hydrologic conditions and response update. And I'd like to kick it over to Director Namath to kick us off on the item and to hear talk about some improvements and improved tools on forecasting at the department.
Good morning, Chair Esquivel and members of the board. Thank you for accommodating my schedule. This has been kind of a long time coming for the department, and I know that in the course of this pretty dramatic year that we had this year, I have been in front of this board, seeking changes in the operations of the State Water Project, given the fact that we had been moving through extreme conditions. And I know at several of those moments, I made a commitment to bring back to the board more of a report on the work that is going on at the department to update and improve our forecasting methods, given where we're headed with extreme conditions under climate. And a lot of this work started in 2021. If you'll recall, we had this enormous drop off in runoff efficiency that year. And that certainly got everyone's attention from a water manager's perspective. But in point of fact, many folks at the department had been tracking some of these challenges for a while. but the intensity of the conditions that developed in 2021 prompted Governor Newsom to provide additional funding to the department to really lean in and accelerate the work that we need to do to improve our forecasting. This is not happening in a vacuum. Although I would say this is probably our first real sort of public presentation of the work that we're doing, and folks are going to see a little bit more of a ramp up in how we get this information out into the public, to our colleagues at the Water Commission and other places. We have been adjusting as we go. You may recall in 2021, we essentially moved to decisions based on a 99% exceedance. That was a new way of thinking about how we're managing our system to try and accommodate some of these extremes from a management perspective. And then I think you may have heard me mention before that the department is working on a multiple climate scenario approach to what's called our delivery capability report that comes out every 2 years and helps our state water contractors understand. Traditionally, that was focused on sort of land use changes in the service area. It was focused on upgrades to our state water project or our asset management plan for the state water project. But now we know that front and center in that report, we need to be thinking about climate extremes and expressing that as a value in terms of the reliability of the state water project. So many things sort of moving together all at once. Before I hand it over to Dr. Anderson, who is the state climatologist, I do want to apologize. I am going to have to peel off relatively soon and brief some folks on Tulare Basin flooding, which is, of course, a paramount concern for the department and helping those communities stay safe. So you're in the extraordinarily capable hands of Dr. Anderson, and I want to think about this as a work in progress with you all, and we will be happy to update you as we move through the fascinating amount of work that we have in front of us, and then certainly do that important work of integrating it into how we manage our water systems more broadly. So with that, again, thank you so much for the opportunity, and I will turn it over to Dr. Anderson.
Thank you, Director Namath. I appreciate you taking the time to be here, introduce the work, and like you said, it's so critical to all the decision-making space that we've been in. The last 2 years have been intense. There is a lot of complexity in the system that we're all managing collectively with each other. And so I know this work feeds into the Water Rights Administration side. We have projects like our Water Rights Data System update. And so just thanks. I know that these investments are helping to improve, as you said, all of us within this space become better decision makers. And so thanks for taking the time, and can appreciate, I know that there's a lot of work going on, so appreciate your time to be able to be here with us.
All right. Good morning, Chair Esquivel and the board. Thank you, Director Namath. Walk through some of the work that we've been doing over the past couple of years, a little bit about just trying to find ways to describe the state of conditions that we've been in for the past decade and where we might go from here. So let's go to the next slide. As we found out with a really strong object lesson in water year 2021, warming world and climate change is altering the relationships between precipitation, snowpack, and runoff. And these are the foundations of what we use to predict our snowmelt through a product that's called the Bulletin 120. In addition to that, though, we have an evolution of data collection and available tools, and that evolution also motivates trying to progress, develop, figure out ways to fit these into the process. And again, the consequences of the extreme in 2021 really drive that focus of accelerated implementation from research to operations. So let's pivot to the next slide. All right, well, let's talk about what had worked for decades. And this is really something to bear in mind that for a long time, we had a multilinear regression analysis between precipitation, streamflow, and snowpack organized around forming them into indices. You're very familiar with our Northern California 8-station index, the San Joaquin 5-station index, and the Tulare Basin 6-station index. And while these remain kind of good thumbprints of tracking how the year's going, relying on them in terms of really understanding how water's coming off the hillside is been demonstrated to have some weaknesses, particularly when we're not well within the historical distribution. Kind of want to show you a little bit how that looks. Let's go to the next slide. So here's the last decade, and this is kind of arranging the data in a way a little differently and kind of working on this concept with my colleagues at NOAA and kind of looking at the middle of the distribution, kind of there in the expected range. When we fall in that range, this type of prediction works fabulously. And challenge there you see is with snowpack and precip, we've only had 1 year in the last 10 that falls in there. You also notice that temperature is stuck on the warm side. And often 8 of the last 10 in the extreme category, in that warmest 10% of the historical distribution. And this is really pushing and driving elements of change that we're seeing manifest themselves. But we also see that precip and snowpack themselves aren't staying within a range where the historical methods work well. Well, this impacts the quality and need to have the expectation that this will continue. So we need to change and change quickly. So let's go to the next slide. All right, well, that was 2013 to 2022. How'd we do in 2023? Well, if you remember all at Christmas, we were contemplating what year 4 of a historic drought would look like. And then 3 weeks, winter showed up in those 3 weeks. And I mean that literally from the standpoint that 80% of a seasonal snowpack was deposited in 3 weeks. 46% of a water year's precipitation showed up in 3 weeks. Now, it wasn't evenly distributed across the state. And you see on the left side there, a product from our colleagues at the Center for Western Weather and Water Extremes showing just the number of atmospheric rivers that really moved from the Columbia Basin early in the season when we were dry to really focusing on California and hitting all parts of it. But the heaviest precip is in that Bay Area to San Diego. The San Joaquin Basin set a new October through March precipitation record at almost 200%, came in at 199. The Bay Area finished 4th wettest, statewide 6th wettest. So really pivoting from extreme dry to extreme wet. And as Director Nemeth talked about, we're now into the 3rd phase, which is that snow melt. And on the right-hand side, you see how the snowmelt stacks up based on our automated sensor network, which goes back to the early 80s. And so in that, 82, 83 is that extreme year. And we see in the Southern Sierra this year surpassed that in terms of the peak on and around April 1. We are into the melt season and navigating then the consequences of that with impacts on the east side of the Sierra, Tulare Lake Bed, and San Joaquin Basins. Let's go to the next slide. All right, so let's talk about the Bullet 120 forecast. And I put up here the part for the Tulare Lake Bed region, just to kind of stress, do monthly bulletin publications starting in February, running through May. So the team right now is working on that May publication. In between, though, there are weekly updates, and those updates are published online. And here we see the April publications and how the data is presented for the basin. They have the median, an anchoring of the projection against median conditions going forward, a wet and a dry boundary of the 10 and 90 that gets us between anomalous and extreme. And really watch the evolution there. Not a whole lot of change in the numbers, but certainly some numbers that are pretty spectacular in amount. Really want to talk about how using this framework, which allows water managers to plan, and augmenting it with some new information, new technologies, and new capabilities that give us a better understanding of how much water to expect and how that then feeds into the rest of the water management process. So let's go to the next slide. All right, so how are the elements that we're working with? Well, one is data management methods. This is the really unglamorous part of the work. This is going through how we collect data with the remote weather stations, how that data is brought in, quality controlled, assimilated into the modeling process, be that a statistical method or a computer model of the watershed. Augmenting those observations, you've heard quite a bit about the airborne remote sensing with the airborne LiDAR and mass spectrometry. Then we'll talk a little bit about that, some of the really neat features coming out of that and the associated modeling. Those augmented modeling tools, and it's not just one, there are actually several that need to come into line. A forecast isn't just the output of a model. It is an engineer looking at the tools that they have in front of them to determine what their expert opinion is on what will happen in the April through July time period. But then not stopping there, really understanding what our methods are and how we evaluate the forecast and how we can look and see how we can do better. These are all things that we've identified as areas that we need to change and move quickly. Let's go to the next slide. All right, so there's a whole lot there. I'm not going to read it, but I wanted to include it for you to look at what happened from June of 2021 through February of 2022, that first development season after the 2021 year. And a lot of this were a lot of the data management issues, going from a 50-year window, which had a tendency to mute that variability, to focusing on the most recent 30-year. And that aligns then with NOAA's climate normal period, and 91 to 2020 is that current normal that we're operating in. Using that then to develop those median increments in precip and runoff, really looking then at going beyond the linear regression, getting into some really novel areas in what's called machine learning. And this is using computers that can look for relationships in data that's gridded data, so you can get spatial data information in and not have to assimilate everything into an index. So really some neat work there. Again, all working on that, including work with the Airborne Snow Observatory using a physically based model of the snowpack called iSnowball, and then coupling that with the watershed model, West Wharf, and really working with a lot of partners to collaborate to bring this online. So let's go to the next slide and look at what happened now in the development season this last summer. Again, more work in the methodology there. You see at the top, symbolic regression, genetic programming. Those are some of those nonlinear regression techniques. Working with our experts down at Scripps Institution of Oceanography to get some help with that and really get some good insights. Working with the Bureau of Reclamation, getting some good collaboration in as they look to explore using iSnowball and the Airborne Snow Observatory. And really looking at a way to develop that analysis and a reforecast analysis. We'll get to that at the end. What wanted you to see, though, is where we're at with the Airborne Snow Observatory. And then one last piece there with the UC Davis watershed model called WEHI. We're working with them to look at how you might use a watershed model and climate forecasts to try and look at a whole water year expectation of runoff within a watershed that can account for both surface and subsurface. And this, we think, could be a really useful tool if we can get it to work. That would work both well for us within the department in forecasting, as well as working with our partners in the water management community. All right, let's go to the next slide. So what have we done this year? 37 flights have been completed with ASO. They're distributed over 12 watersheds. We forecast 18. So do not have full build out of this operationally, but it is expanding. Got reports from them, 76 reports across those of modeling the evolution of the snowpack and really trying to understand, particularly in an extreme condition, how well the model's working. We have WRF Hydro actually up and running and available for the forecasters to look at for 5 of the watersheds. And these are the ones that have the longest history in the program. And that's the Tuolumne down through the Kings. Reclamation also provided some grants for the Truckee and Carson rivers to fold in the work with the Tahoe Basin and the east side streams that they manage. So really working again, trying to, what is a very expensive program, but build it in with our partners as best we can. And really trying to work together collaboratively to figure out how to get this set up and then how to move forward with it. So let's go to the next slide. I just want to show some examples of some of that augmented data that comes out of the flights and the modeling. On the left-hand side for the San Joaquin, and this comes from the mid-April flight, you actually see the 3 flights that they took, one at the beginning of, one in late January, one in mid-March, one in April. So you see the growth of the snowpack. You really see the peak of the snowpack stayed at about the same elevation. But this distribution of snow across the elevations in much greater detail is really helpful to understand how that might change with the different kinds of years that we have. We knew from a very broad scale view that 2015, 2020, 2021 were different than, say, the years 2017, 2019, and this year. And really understanding how snow is going to sit on the mountain really is important to help understand how and how much will run off. On the right-hand side is really an element of that modeling that helps, particularly in a big year like this, and it's understanding how the snowpack moves from a state where it's developed all winter, has a certain amount of cold content to it. It has its own thermal inertia. That has to be broken down for the crystals to actually get to a density that they can break those bonds, melt, and become liquid. And so now we can actually model that across the elevations and get a sense of where the melt's coming from. And in this case, in mid-April, as we might expect, the bulk of the melt is coming from that 6,000 foot elevation, but we are seeing melt all the way up to 12,000 feet at the surface. We still have a lot of the snow that has a density that's not ready to melt. Really helped understand that a little bit of melt will happen up to high elevations with that warming, but not the whole thing. So the fears of the big melt, everything coming off at once, this is a way to help inform that that's not how it works, but we're getting better understanding. Next slide. All right, the other thing that I think is really helpful is with the modeling, you break down on how much snow is in each part of the watershed. And here we're looking at the Kings River and really looking again at the breakdown of the different parts of the Kings River and how much snow we see in each one. This helps us understand, one, how much water is in different parts of the watershed, but also understanding that the really big components there in the middle and south forks really have a lot of those north-facing slopes, meaning that that's where the snow is going to hang in and melt later on in June and July, whereas the south-facing slopes, lower elevations, will be the places where the melt happens first. And then just getting the explicit mapping there on the left of the snow, and you can actually see the fingerings of the canyons there in the mapping is pretty impressive. Let's go to the next slide. All right, so doing even more. One, we had the good fortune that we've got 3 staff positions that we have tentative offers for that will be filled to support those augmented tools and forecasting data. Really building the team out to handle this extended capabilities and really help provide a greater team to work with our collaborators, but also work in communicating the information that they have and how they have it. We embedded a meteorologist from the Center for Western Weather and Water Extremes, his name is Chad Hecht, into the Joint Operations Center. So he spent the winter in the Operations Center, really learned how the operations work at DWR and CNRFC, but he was also able to provide guidance on the tools that CW3E was building and really being side by side. That's been a huge value. Really excited about that, and also bringing in one of the center's hydrologists as well to really augment that experience. This year, the Bulletin 120 uses a 6-day precip forecast from CNRFC. So instead of just saying median conditions, when you knew the forecast is going to be different those first 6 days, they make that acknowledgement and use that to modify those forecasts. And that's helpful, particularly in early April, because the bulk of the April through July precip happens in the early part of April. So getting that component in there really can make a big difference in understanding, particularly in 2021, when there was no rain, no need to predict median conditions. Go ahead and put those zeros in. Continuing that experimental seasonal forecasting with our colleagues at UC Davis, and really getting better understanding of the watershed model WEHI and what it may be able to do for us. And then also continuing collaboration and development with the Corps of Engineers, because they have their own set of tools, particularly used in reservoir management. So being able to understand how the tools can work together and work as we build in other adaptation strategies like forecast-informed reservoir operations. Really trying to make sure that we can develop a suite of tools, but then understand how they work together and how our forecasting team can use them to their best advantage. Let's go to the next slide. All right, so I wanted to get back to this as we kind of get to the end here. In the past, we relied on a hindcast. We basically got through the end of July, we had all the observed conditions. And so we said, well, if you have all the observed data, how does the regression work? What does it tell us? But that really isn't a complete way to analyze how the model would behave during the forecast season. And so we've now worked with our colleagues helping us at CW3E, really doing a more complete evaluation using a reforecast, where we actually use the model outputs that would have been calculated on a particular date, but looking at it so like we can go back and do a reforecast in past years, but still keep that element of forecasting in the analysis. And that evaluates what that value of adding in the forecast precip data, what the value is of different models, interpretations, different statistical approaches, finding that some data, at least the way we're handling it right now, isn't necessarily helping the outcome, which is a possibility, but it's a great way to help in that evaluation component. And I think strengthening that will make the program stronger overall and really allow us to continue to evolve methods as climate change is going to continue to evolve how the water years show up. So let's go to the next slide. All right, well, let's talk about the value of this. Key both in what the department does and what the board has to do. It takes time in water management for any water management decisions in the regulatory framework. And part of that has been put into statute to use forecasts. So given that, it's really important that we kind of keep up with Mother Nature and come up with ways that work and work quickly so we mitigate the number of times we find ourselves in the challenges that were present in water year 2021. Working to develop that information content really clarifies the decision space. If I can articulate, maybe not just that there's uncertainty, but what the uncertainty looks like, that helps understand where different management decisions are, and understanding that at different lead times as we understand better about timing, pace and scale of the storms as they arrive, and not just having to rely on historical ways that that has happened. And then working to extend that lead time to better manage extremes. Boy, howdy, heading into December, having a notion that we were going to see a very significant change coming, to the extent that we could actually plan to it, would be really helpful. And this is in that, you might have heard, S2S forecasting, subseasonal to seasonal, and have a really good collaboration with a number of federal agencies and academic partners building in this, and really focusing the research community, which is really nice about things that'll help California. It also helps the rest of the nation, and certainly those states that deal with a snowmelt component, but focusing the problems they look at first on California is a nice element of leading the group. Let's go to the next slide. All right, so as you can see, we've got a lot going on. Really trying to improve both the information coming in through data and the tools that are used for forecasting. Still more work to be done. As you saw, we don't have full build out of the program, but we have a sense of where we're going We did finalize what we call the roadmap for a climate resilient forecasting framework, and that has been released. And that lays out what we're trying to do. It's around 2 goals: really get more spatially complete data that allows us to understand how precip and snowpack are changing on the watershed, not just trying to rely on changes in indexes. And then develop those physically based tools that allow us to simulate the process rather than just a relationship that might be moving towards a much more dynamic state, but really having a suite of tools for the forecaster to be understanding each tool's strengths and weaknesses and leverage that knowledge as they put together the best information we can through the bulletin process. I think the next slide is for questions. Yes, it is. And put a picture up of the team, Sean de Guzman and the water supply forecasting team out in the field as they did some field work with the snow tubes. Anyway, happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. I appreciate the presentation of the work that DWR has been doing, and also the note about the climate resilient forecasting framework. I hadn't heard about it, so look forward to kind of unpacking that further as well. And just appreciate, I know, this is all a moving space, and here, really take away that we're needing to shift away from reliance on historical averages that, again, don't reflect what the actual circumstances we're finding. That graph or the graphic that you presented that really showed how so many of the years over the last couple decade plus have been just way outside of what would normally be these, again, kind of exceedances looking at the history. And I appreciate that a lot of the work has been to de-emphasize, if you will, that historical record, have it be more contemporary insofar as a shorter window sooner here that captures this changed climate we're in. But all the in situ observation work is really critical as well. It's really that, I feel, that marrying of that ability to model and understand the system better with then just what are the actual observed conditions that we have, and being able to find that sweet spot between them as we try to manage through water years that at this point are doing anything but being predictable based off of historic averages. I appreciate it. Just the good summary of all the good work that's going on, and again, how it's all benefiting here, not just ourselves, but all of our sister agencies, and importantly, local managers who similarly, like us, all with us, have to see this complex system for what it actually is as we try to manage through it. And just so I have a lot of thanks. Nothing question-wise off the bat, other than what are perhaps some of the products or like other things that we should be, kind of keep our lookout for over the next few months? Are there, particular products or otherwise convenings that DWR is looking to have that we should be in mind of?
Well, so kind of play out the rest of the water year here as we finish the forecasting with May. Now that'll be the monthly bulletin. May is the last one of those. There will be weekly updates that'll likely extend into July because there's such a significant snowpack. From there, then we have kind of the summer development season where we really look in that reforecasting process to kind of evaluate and really emphasize that that is a much stronger way to help us evaluate how we're doing and be able to make those changes to move forward. Also meeting with our local partners in the summertime, getting feedback from them. What they like, what didn't they like? What information that we provide in those reports from the ice snowball modeling, as well as the airborne snow observatory data. What do they like? What would they like to see different? And really looking at ways to take very complex information and try and get it into a report format that communicates the information needed. I think we'll see a lot of that. We're really looking at the West Wharf team. This is a watershed model that can also incorporate weather forecasts, and we have actually 2 elements of the team. We have the element of the team that came from the Airborne Snow Observatory side with the development in the Jet Propulsion Lab research, as well as our partners at Scripps that are using the same model platform, which then combine the 2 as a single team and really trying to generate as much value out of the technical expertise and really developing what will likely be the best modeling development team in the world. So pretty excited to see how that plays out here, especially as we head into the next water year. Certainly no expectation of anything different than a lot of unusual weather that have to keep us on our toes.
Definitely. I appreciate that. It is exciting work, and it is, here of not just national, but international significance. I know when it comes to all of us better being able to have, especially these sub-seasonal and seasonal predictions. Yeah, I know there's, we're all understanding that we're moving into likely an El Nino year, what that actually means, and this time, and especially with, as you said, the uncertainty that's really coming with these various water years. We'll just have to be better on our toes, and appreciate that. Again, there's a lot of incredible work going on, and just continue thanks. Looking to my fellow colleagues, if there's any questions for Mr. Anderson or any of the work that we've seen here. Hearing none. Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Appreciate the presentation. We'll let you off the hook here. Let's go ahead and take a quick, just 10-minute break, because we've been going nonstop since 9:30. And do want to provide folks just a quick moment to take a breath. We'll come back here at 2:15, say, and then at 12:15, sorry. Let's not come back at 2:15. That would be an actual really long lunch break. But we'll wrap up our discussion around item number 3. We have some presentation from staff. We have public comment, and then it's just board member reports. So we'll try to wrap up before we actually take a lunch. So let's get here at 12:15-ish, give or take a moment. And just thank you, everyone. I know it's been an intense and meaty morning. So thank you. See you here in about 10 minutes. Okay, it is 12:18, a few minutes after 12:15. Appreciate everyone's patience as we had a quick break. And we can now continue on item number 3, which is our hydrologic update. I'd like to turn it over to Ms. Bean. Thank you for the patience.
Thank you so much. It will be a quick update today. So I'm Jessica Bean with the Division of Water Rights. Going to do a quick hydrologic update for you. Next slide, please. And this is a version of the slide that you saw with Mike Anderson's presentation. Mine's actually a little older than his, so his was more up to date. But essentially, as of yesterday, we're at 240% for the statewide snowpack average when DWR did their May 1st snowpack survey. And again, you can see that the percentage is a bit lower up north, and as you head south, it gets higher. Next slide, please. And then looking at the precipitation index, we are at 126% at the Northern Sierra index. That's the dark blue line there. Next slide, please. For the San Joaquin index, we are at 168%. Again, the blue line. Next slide, please. And for the Tulare Basin, we're at 197% of average for this time of year. Next slide, please. And then for the reservoir conditions, you can see here our traditional slide. The green line is the historical average. The blue bar tells us where the capacity is for the different reservoirs. Overall, 65% right now of reservoirs are at or above their historical average. And for those select south of Delta reservoirs, Cachuma is 101% of capacity, San Luis is at 99%, and Diamond Valley is at 66% of capacity. Next slide, please. Just a quick touch on weather, which we heard a bit about again from Mike Anderson, but we did have this late April heat wave late last week, which meant that rivers and creeks were flowing high, cold, and fast. Just friendly reminder that will be happening for quite some time, and encourage people to be safe out on the rivers and creeks. It's also worth noting that April did have some unusually high some actual records in certain areas for those certain days. And we have some unsettled upcoming patterns. That's been a consistent message from the National Weather Service lately. So right now we have some colder conditions, a bit of snow, and then some thunderstorms happening out there as well. And then finally, just to note that most of the models right now are predicting El Nino, moderate to strong El Nino later this summer and fall. As we've heard also from the previous presentation, models can be tricky and there's a lot that goes into them. So it's worth noting that these are early in the season like this. It's actually hard to say for sure what's going to happen. And they get better around June. So we'll know a little bit more. But what does that mean? That means it could be wet and it could be dry. However, it's worth noting that historically we haven't seen back-to-back very wet winters in the modern era. However, we have seen a lot of back-to-back dry winters. And that doesn't mean we couldn't see it. It's just worth noting that historically we have not seen that. So more to come on that going forward. Next slide, please. For the watershed updates, there have not really been many changes. I will point out that the Shasta River curtailments are now conditionally suspended through the end of the month, and we anticipate the Scott River will also be conditionally suspended through the end of the month. I think that's going to be released at some point later today or tomorrow. And then the rest remain the same. Next slide, please. And that is it for this update. There will be, I believe, some shifts coming forward you'll have some additional presenters talking more about different conditions as necessary, but happy to answer any questions today.
Thank you, Ms. Bean. Maybe one of the last times we see drought as one of the headlines around our update. But we know, again, there's ongoing drought work. We still have communities that are having dry wells, ongoing need to support those. So it doesn't diminish that work. But yes, this item will have it more be just a space to have general updates. There's a lot of work that the board is ongoing and doing both in flood response and drought response. And so just appreciate we'll try to, we're going to keep this space to be able to continue to provide general updates, but we'll figure out kind of what the scope and title even will be. So appreciate it. I don't have any other questions right now. I know that there's still ongoing work happening with Division of Drinking Water, Division of Financial Assistance, even though we don't have presentations here. And importantly, I know just real critical work with the Emergency Management Program as we continue to support the decision making that Cal OES and DWR are front on flood fighting, but that we know whether it's impact on water quality, impact on infrastructure like wastewater treatment plants or drinking water treatment plants, we have a role in response recovery and data in order to help facilitate what I know is a lot of decision making going on and how to handle these this melt that is incredibly you're going to have to manage over the next weeks. So just want to give nod to that and note that there is, I know, a lot of ongoing work. And just thank folks in the division, both at Water Rights and the others, for their work right now amongst everything. Any questions from fellow board members? I know we have a commenter, and so would like to look to Tien Tran. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Chair, Vice Chair, and members of the board. I'm Tien Tran, Policy Advocate with Community Water Center, and I want to thank the Chair for mentioning, the community impacts in terms of flooding and extreme drought conditions, and want to focus my comments on that. So last month, with partners, we submitted a comment letter and provided verbal comments on the 6 inadequate groundwater sustainability plans in the San Joaquin Valley. And unfortunately, we're still seeing devastating impacts to communities due to unsustainable groundwater use. The State Water Board must take urgent action to ensure all Californians have access to safe and affordable drinking water. Even with the intense rain events earlier this year, over 200 households have reported a dry well, and that's so far in 2023. And we unfortunately expect to see that happen and continue. Our state is reeling from extreme dry conditions of the past decade, and even though self-help enterprises has tirelessly worked to address the drinking water well backlog and provide emergency water, the drinking water crisis is outstripping the response. At last count, 1,712 households are still reliant on hauled water, and it will take 2 decades to drill replacement wells, even if no new wells went dry. It is critical to address the source of the problem, which is overpumping of our precious groundwater, and ensure sustainability in the San Joaquin Valley. In our analysis of groundwater sustainability annual reports, we found that groundwater sustainability agencies are not making progress on sustainability indicators. Even though agencies have set up allocation schemes, overdraft, water quality degradation, subsidence, and other undesirable results are happening. We urge the State Water Board to set clear expectations and deadlines for improvements to the plans. This should include a timeline for probationary hearings so that the state is poised to step up on behalf of residents of disadvantaged communities whose human right to water is at risk. DWR's findings and the inadequate determinations provide ample evidence to initiate probationary status, and additions by the State Water Board to articulate deficiencies in water quality, climate resilience, and public participation would set basins on a clear path to sustainability. Thank you for your time and work, and we look forward to working with you and the staff on this new stage of sustainable groundwater management. Thank you.
Thank you for your continued great work and engagement on these issues. Yeah, I know it is overlapping ultimately the challenges that so many communities are facing, whether across drought or flood, and importantly, how we manage across those. And Sigma is an important tool amongst them. And I know for all of us here, we're just trying to do our best to see the forest for the trees. So even as we respond in emergency fashion to communities or support water quality programs at the regional board that help also accomplish access to clean water, or then moments with Sigma. I appreciate the contributions to the thought around how we best see the needs of communities across those different programs and authorities, and do our best to make sure that the outcomes we're all, I think, all largely agreeing on and looking to have happen be supported. So just thank you. I appreciate the comments. Board members, anything else on item number 3? And anything, any thoughts actually would be helpful if folks have them just on expectations on future updates. You know, what is it that board members would want to make sure is part of that? You guys have any thoughts? But then otherwise, something to think about and circle back with folks. Because again, we're going to want to pivot this item a little bit. So appreciate everyone's good thoughts. Okay, thank you, Ms. Bean. That concludes item number 3, and then brings us back onto our calendar, and I think onto item for the board member reports, I believe that we're on now. So any board members would like to kick us off here as I try to pull up my calendar. And yes, we're on to item number 7, board member reports.
You can go.
Board member Firestone, thank you.
Great. Well, I first wanted to start with, I missed the last board meeting, so I had meant to use that opportunity to update on the Tribal Water Summit that I was able to participate in. So really amazing time, a lot of good participation from water board staff and really good participation from tribal leaders around a huge host of issues. And I know Vice Chair Diadamo was able to join for a lot. So a few things I wanted to highlight of just where kind of what I took away, some of the things I took away from it. One is that I think there was a real appreciation for the looking at the Clear Lake Hitch work that's been going on as a real model, and looking at ways to kind of operationalize that partnership across all the agencies, tribes, and locals before we're in an emergency in other areas as well. There's a lot of really interesting discussion around tribal beneficial use designations. And one of the things that was clear is, as we know, each regional board is on their own path and process on this, but there's also a lot of things that are coming up in each of the regions and for tribes that are trying to navigate that, that I think could really, or it seems like what I heard was could really use some clarity and maybe guidance in terms of some consistency across the region. So some of the examples are, protections for sovereignty and confidentiality of tribal ecological knowledge and use of data within our designation processes, financial support to tribes, and then even things like there's, I think, differing approaches to the ideas of more holistic all waters designations of water bodies for certain uses, kind of flipping the default to be that there are tribal beneficial uses for the waters in a region and then doing a more of a de-designation or identifying areas that are exceptions to that, rather than just having to prove each individual area. And that's, I think there's already regions that are taking different interpretations of that. So I just wanted to raise that because I think it's something it would be helpful for us to look at, maybe revisiting what role the state board might be able to play in terms of providing some guidance on pathways for regions, rather than kind of waiting till things are brought up to us, and also helping tribes be able to navigate that. So I think something to follow up on and just flag for us. And let's see, I think, heard a lot, this isn't new, but I think given how much we're really leaning into tribal engagement is just that one of the analogies that one of the tribal leaders had was that when they're engaging with agencies, we're all looking at just like our little slice, but tribes are that little slice doesn't really make sense. They're looking at I think they said like a pizza rather than slices of the pizza when they're thinking about kind of holistic watersheds and the issues that they're working on. And so just being, continuing to try to figure out how we bridge that challenge of fitting within our roles and processes around meaningful engagement, but also acknowledging that those don't necessarily make sense for folks in the reality of the world. And so, and I think that is a challenge. I'm thinking about, certainly all the Bay Delta plan update processes. There's so many little individual things, and I think it's hard to figure out how to bridge that. And then I think just really fully trying to support our internal resources and people doing tribal affairs work. That was something I heard from a lot of folks, that there's really great people from our agency and others that have a lot of expertise in tribal engagement and that they really appreciate and rely on, and just making sure that we're continuing to support that and increase our resources and expertise and time to meaningfully consult and engage with tribes throughout our program areas. I think those were the main things I wanted to share. There was some, so many different topics discussed, from water rights to drinking water. And I think my understanding is there will be some kind of report back and summary from things that folks heard. Only other thing I'd mention was last week, I was able to participate in environmental justice and climate change conference at Santa Clara, which was great. There was really good engagement from students and communities, tribal communities, and academic researchers in particular, around a whole host of issues. And I was able to talk on a podcast with UC Davis. That's a Water Talks podcast. I think you all have done, which was fun. That's it.
Awesome. Thank you, board member. And especially appreciated the vice chair and your attendance at the Tribal Summit and the readout from that. I was out on vacation that week, but knew we were well represented. So thank you for that. I'll quickly launch into my board member report. I'll start with the 21st when I was down in Tulare with Director Namath and also Nancy Ward, the head of Cal OES. We're meeting with the counties to go over information and support that DWR and Cal OES has been very upfront about having for especially the local counties as they try to make their way through a lot of decision making down at the Tulare Basin. As we know, the Central Valley Flood Plan just covers the San Joaquin components. The Tulare Basin was not part of that comprehensive plan. So there's a lot of need to contribute to some really quick and good decision making and assessment as to where potential flooding is. What is the magnitude of the volume of snow water equivalent? How does that make its way down to then potentially the old Tulare lake bed? And how do we ensure we support the local decision making up and down that system to ensure that property lives are saved and importantly critical infrastructure isn't hurt? So it was a really good meeting and convening. There continues to be a lot of convening, and following that Friday meeting on then the 17th of last week. So last Monday, I started the week actually in the Delta visiting. We had our Delta Plan Interagency Implementation Committee, DPIC meeting, which is the state and Fed agencies around implementation of the Delta Plan. I just want to acknowledge and thank Chair Medueno for taking DPIC out into the field. We saw Dutch Slough, a restoration project within the Delta. Delta Water Master there was there, Jay Ziegler, along with representatives from, again, all of our state and federal agencies within the Delta. It was a really good convening. It was great to see the progress being made on projects like Dutch Slough and the potential for restoration. I brought up our general order, the importance of that large restoration general order to future projects out there, and hoping that folks really take advantage of that good synthesis and work that was done with Fish and Wildlife, our regional boards, and all of the folks in the restoration community to really come up with a program that can respond to at scale the great need we know for restoration out there. So that was a good day on Monday. On Tuesday, then I want to apologize. I was supposed to be in the South Delta along with the vice chair. I want to appreciate Board Member McGuire for stepping in because I was called away. And in fact, instead of being on the South Delta tour on Tuesday, I was in Tulare with the governor, Director Namath again, Nancy Ward, and seeing and touring along with the governor the damage that has been done, not just from the footprint of Old Lake Tulare that is there, but then the flooding that happened with those atmospheric rivers in a number of communities, including Allensworth, where the governor had a good meeting. It was good to see Denise Kadara, who is a member of our Regional Water Quality Control Board. Her family, the community, really managed through some really frightening conditions as floodwaters were potentially threatening the community, and a lot of decision making was happening in rapid succession with often not a lot of information around. But we heard from Allensworth, the good work that Cal OES and Cal Fire and others have done in response. We also heard about the compounding challenges that Allensworth has. It's not just around the lack of investment in flooding or the concerns on flooding, it's also drought impacts and drinking water impacts. And we know and proud of the good work that the Division of Drinking Water, along with DFA and others, have been doing to help Allensworth, knowing that it's one of many communities out there that for too long haven't had adequate access. So it was good for that conversation to be part of the convening as well. And again, just to see the impact of floodwaters. Supervisor Eddie Valero was there as well, and it was good to connect with him as well. He's a great leader. We're fortunate for him down there across all of these issues. So there again, I just want to emphasize, our role is to really support the decision making and the recovery to flood response here, knowing that again, there's water quality issues out there. There's issues of impacts to drinking water infrastructure, wastewater infrastructure, and just want to give a huge shout out to our emergency program, the regional boards as well. I know Region 5 with all the work that's been going on around recharge discussions or flooding has been pivotal to so much of the work that's being done, and Region 3 as Pajaro, as you board member were able to tour and make mention of the impacts there, but the quick recovery as well. It was we've been able to respond in ways that I'm just incredibly proud of the shift that we did here. It was not just a few months ago, as we all know, that we were talking about drought impacts here, and then seeing the pivot has been again, I've been very proud of and glad that the governor was able to see the good work out there then as well. Then on Wednesday, I was at a budget hearing that went long because otherwise was going to tour with East Valley Water District, but still flew down to East Valley Water District there in Upland, there in San Bernardino County, and had the opportunity to attend their board meeting, which I really appreciated. It was actually, I think, one of the first board meetings of another just local district that I attended, and I was supposed to do so after our tour. It kind of switched them up. I attended the board meeting. It was good to chat with the board, to just be able to let my presence be known around and hear just support for a lot of the work that they were able to do around the Sterling Natural Resource Center. And I invite and encourage any of the board members to get up and see that facility. It's a new wastewater treatment plant. It's recycling water and recharging the groundwater. The community is up at the headwaters of the Santa Ana River watershed, and so have done amazing work to put together a project that has a community center, provides a lot of community benefit. They're also going to be producing power. They have a digester there. They'll be also accepting redirected waste from landfills and creating energy, and then also biosolids and other beneficial products like in compost there locally to be used locally. So it's a really they have bioreactor membranes, and for those of you and in the wastewater side, I know those are relatively new. They really reduce the footprint of plants, and so it's got all the bells and whistles. It's in an impacted community, and they also have a septic to sewer application. And so I feel an example of an agency that's doing really good work up there, and glad that our programs, the state revolving fund and grants, have supported it all and made it affordable there. I then, on Thursday evening, as I was still in Southern California, attended UCLA Luskin Center's lecture and was honored to be part of a panel after a talk by Catherine Flowers, who is she's an activist from Alabama in the South, really championing access to sanitation. She was actually at the White House along with Denise Kodara the Friday prior for the signing of an environmental justice executive order by the president. She was then also, she had just come to the event the day prior from Times 100 interview, where she will be one of Times 100 individuals, and she really deserves it. She's incredibly impressive. I was honored to be there, part of the panel, to talk about the California side of this discussion, the human right to water, our work around drinking water and sanitation, and how it has similarities and differences, and the learning that we can do. And I look forward to follow up with Catherine. She's very interested in our wastewater needs assessment, the septic to sewer work that we're doing here in the state. One of the contrasts, certainly, although a lot of commonality between our communities and challenges, but one of the contrasts was certainly a state government here that is supportive and not antagonistic sometimes to the fight that many locals have had. So that was an honor to be part of, and wraps up what was a busy week last week.
I don't know how to follow that. And you've already mentioned the one item that I have to update on, which is the tour on the 25th with hosted by John Herrick with South Delta Water Agency, and a really interesting meeting and opportunity to get a number of agencies together: CDFW, Department of Water Resources, Delta Conservancy, and our very own Jay Ziegler, Delta Water Master and Vice Chair Diadamo. And really just put into context many of the challenges that are faced in the Southern Delta waterways that have existed for so long, whether it's, sediment accumulation, invasive species, aquatic plant growth, water quality challenges that have, we all know very well about these issues. And this was a follow-up, I think, from when John Herrick came and provided some comments to us a month or two ago at the board meeting about a couple of project ideas that he had. One being, the Paradise Cut project, which you've heard about, to re-engage some waterways in the Delta, and then also opportunities to dredge a number of the channels that have silted in over time. And so we had a chance to go. I don't think we actually looked at Paradise Cut in detail, but we looked at a number of the channels, and it was an interesting date to be out there because there's so much water actually in the Delta. So we had to use our imagination in terms of how bad the channels really are during the summer when water levels are several feet lower than what they were. But it was a beautiful day to be out and about, so I really appreciated that, and I tried to envision what it really looks like. And I think the main takeaway for me is that, so we went to a couple places, one of which was called Salmon Slough, which I think was Mr. Herrick's number one place of opportunity. And I trust that there's probably no salmon there, given the nature of the channel. It's all overgrown and silted in, and right at some critical junctures in the Delta. And so the approach that he took, I think, was a very good one in saying that, hey, state agencies. I'm not I'm an attorney. I'm not pretending to have all the answers in terms of what to do with these locations and where limited resource investments might make the most sense. But here you go. Here's a whole bunch of sites, agencies. Think about this from a multi-benefit perspective, and where these projects can be re-envisioned, whether it's tidal wetlands or different types of on-stream, habitat, or for terrestrial species, riparian habitat. There's some farmland or an island area that has, really isn't being used for anything at this point. So it was just really fun to be out there at the ground floor of trying to innovate and think about this area in ways that it can be reimagined and hopefully reinvigorated in the future in terms of its ecosystem function, in terms of being able to provide water quality improvements and meet all of those needs. So hopefully some good, and I'm trust some good will come out of that, and there will be more opportunities to be in that area and see what comes next.
It's truly an engineered landscape, and we'll continue to need to assess and figure out how to best engineer it for its future, right? Yeah, I think, and I want to acknowledge the previous Delta Water Master as well. I know Michael George had really kind of helped usher in a lot of discussion, and so glad that Jay's really taking that forward and that the tour happened. Thank you, board member.
Yeah, so the only thing that I would just add is connecting the dots on these opportunities to the Paradise Cut project. So the Paradise Cut project is a flood control project that San Joaquin County is the lead agency on. This project's been around a really long time, and I know the Corps of Engineers has been involved, but it's just sort of lagged. John Herrick is really interested in trying to bring in a dredging component. And so, of course, there will be mitigation required. And so it's sort of his pitch throughout was, what do you guys need? What do you need for mitigation? There's opportunities for restoration, but then there's also, these opportunities to connect it to this project that'll probably need mitigation, not really knowing exactly what that looks like. So I think that it was a good idea for him to bring together a lot of creative thinkers. Steve Rother was there, a number of people from the Department of Water Resources, and there was just a lot of nodding of the heads because we were at some amazing sites. Of course, because the water was there, it's so amazing. But the idea is if this dredging can occur, then we wouldn't see that. There'd be more opportunities for some shallow water habitat. And a couple of the sites, on one side there's a levee, but then on the other side, the island that board member McGuire was referring to, no levee. And so it just seems like it's tailor-made for restoration. So that was really exciting. And then we suggested connecting with our 401 team. And when we got back, Mike Reed made that connection for John Herrick. So hopefully we'll hear more. And I know Jay's going to be following up as well.
Fantastic. Thank you, Vice Chair. I think that brings us to the end of board member reports. I apologize. I meant to mention that Eileen Sobek, our executive director, is joining us. She is virtual along with Eric Oppenheimer. He is virtual as well. You know how hit or miss on sometimes my intros. Good to see you, Ms. Sobek. Thank you for joining. Anything on the executive director's report, number 8?
Yes, hi, board members. I did want to mention 2 things with the executive director's report this month. The first is just to remind everybody that the first thing that we have every month in the report is an update on what's been happening or will be happening with the California water supply strategy. And so the main item that I want to make sure everybody focuses on is that one of our first major deliverables is due on June 30th. And it has to do with clarifying and streamlining ideas to promote desal projects in the state. And so our staff has been working really diligently, both within the water boards, with the regional boards, and also with other state agencies to get information and get ideas and to put them together. And we will be going out in June with a very short 10-day public comment period. And so I want to make sure that people are prepared for that, because we do want to make sure that we hit our June 30th deadline. So just wanted to highlight that. And if you are being asked for what's going on with the California Water Supply Strategy, I recommend you take a look at these reports every month. It's pointed out to us recently that we're coming up on the 1-year anniversary of the Water Supply Strategy, and we will work with our folks and with folks from other agencies to come up with a summary of what we've been doing over the last year, probably later this summer or early fall. And then the second thing I wanted to highlight is that towards the end of the report this month, we have an update from our Office of Public Participation. And putting together these reports, it's really hard to figure out how much to include. It's already a very lengthy report, but one of the goals is to highlight the really important but not necessarily super controversial work, but the work that's essential to providing a firm foundation for decision points that do come up to the board. And it came to my attention that there really hadn't been a lot of there weren't a lot of entries from OPP, and I do think that we tend to de-emphasize some of our process functions and emphasize some of our actual output, which I think is extremely important. But the Office of Public Participation, the work they do to make sure that we're hearing from all relevant stakeholders, that we are reaching out to communities, that we are helping to facilitate discussions, some of which are very difficult, and that they have such a wide range of responsibilities. It wasn't clear to me that we were really representing the work that they do very, very, very well. And so we have a sort of extended report out from them about the work they do, just to help board members realize what a huge portfolio they have and what an essential part of our work throughout the water boards they've become. And we'll try to be better in the future about including some highlights from that office on a more regular basis. So thank you for that. That's it for me.
Huge thank you to you, Director Sobek. Especially, I appreciated the breakdown on language access. How many requests have been made. How many meetings have been interpreted and or translated on the document side. It is really important work, and appreciate it being highlighted better here with the report. Really appreciate that priority. Board members with questions, comment on the Executive Director's report. Board Member Firestone.
Yeah, I'll echo that. Thanks. And these are always so helpful to get updates on all the work going on and where things are. Appreciate the update on Chrome 6 and direct potable reuse regs. And it looks like both of those are trying to meet this month or next month. So just, I guess, a continued push to make sure those get out on schedule, and appreciate the updates on that. And then the only other thing I wanted to request is just making sure we can get updates on Sigma implementation. I didn't see that in the report this time, and maybe that's just because this isn't the month to give a lot of new information, but just wanted to flag that for future reports and make sure we can get that. Oh, one last thing that I'll mention is at some point it would be great to get an overview of what some of the impacts of the storms were on wastewater and stormwater systems overall in the state, because I know there were some spills and infrastructure issues, and just kind of understanding that as we see what those impacts were on some of our oversight program areas. So thanks.
Yeah, thank you, board member. I know we've been receiving updates from the emergency management program, summarizing some of that in some sort of table form for the executive director's report could be helpful, I think,
Yeah,
for public
more on
to
just
understand. what has been going on?
Yeah, I really appreciate the emergency reports, but I think what I was thinking is more kind of the wastewater system responses that the regional boards have been needing to do on spills and that sort of thing. So that may not be going through the OES kind of piece.
Director Sobek?
We'll look into that. I think you did hit the nail on the head, though, Board Member Firestone, which is those responses are being worked through the region, so Region 5. So most of those are not going through the state board, but maybe we can get a summary from them.
Great. Thank you both. I think that concludes item number 8 and brings us to the end of today's board meeting. We will meet and convene tomorrow on item number 9, which is a workshop on the second revised draft initial biological goals report for the Lower San Joaquin River flow objectives. And so until then, we'll be in recess and until tomorrow morning at 9:30. Thank you, everyone. I know it's been an intense first half of the day here, but appreciate everyone's patience. Thank you. We'll see you tomorrow morning. Have a good evening. Until then.